Elsewhere, the world twisted. It happened without warning, space folding inward on itself like paper crushed in a fist, colors bleeding into a single point of nothing. One moment Uchiha Akira stood within the council hall, its familiar wooden pillars and murmuring voices wrapped around him like a second skin. The next, all of it was gone, torn away and replaced by an endless, spiraling dark that had no beginning and no end. He did not scream. He did not struggle. He simply let the void carry him, his mind strangely still even as his body was dragged through whatever twisted dimension had swallowed him whole. Then, his feet touched solid ground. The distortion peeled away like smoke retreating from a flame, and the darkness gave way to something almost worse, silence. Akira opened his eyes and looked around, unhurried, as though he had merely stepped into an unfamiliar place rather than been ripped from his own world. He found himself standing in a vast underground cavern. Cold stone walls rose around him and vanished into shadow far overhead. Moisture beaded along the ceiling and fell in slow, scattered drops, each one striking the floor with a hollow clink that echoed longer than it should have. The air was damp and heavy, thick with the smell of wet rock and something colder still, the stale, airless quiet of a place that had never known sunlight. A handful of torches flickered against the walls, their dim, restless light casting long shadows that seemed to breathe against the stone. Akira said nothing. He walked forward, slow and deliberate, his footsteps swallowed by the vastness of the cavern, and pressed his palm flat against the cold stone wall, feeling its texture, its chill, the faint tremor of chakra woven somewhere deep beneath its surface. His expression gave nothing away. If he was afraid, it did not show. If he was curious, it barely showed either. Behind him, the air folded again. A spiral tore open in the space he had just vacated, and from within it, a figure stepped through, a black cloak trailing like a shadow-given form, an orange, swirl-patterned mask concealing everything but a single crimson eye. That eye fixed on Akira with a stillness that felt almost predatory. "You know far too many secrets," the masked man said, his voice low, resonating off every wall at once. Uchiha Akira. Beneath the calm was something sharper, hunger, perhaps, or the beginnings of unease. "Tell me," he continued, "where did you learn all of that?" Akira didn't answer. He let his fingers trail along the stone a moment longer, as though the question hadn't reached him at all, as though the man behind him were nothing more than another draft of cold air moving through the cavern. The mask tilted, faintly amused by the silence, or perhaps irritated by it. "Don't waste your effort," the man said. "This place exists within my space-time ninjutsu. There is only one entrance, and only one exit. As long as I don't allow it, you will never leave this place." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the slow drip of water from the ceiling. Then the masked man straightened, and the air itself seemed to change with him. Pressure rolled outward from his frame, pressing down on the cavern like an invisible weight, thick enough that even the shadows seemed to shrink from it. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its measured calm, replaced by something closer to reverence for himself. "Kneel," he said, "for you stand before the man who once shook the entire shinobi world, the founder of fear itself, the only Uchiha capable of standing beside the god of shinobi, the one destined to reshape this broken world." A pause, heavy with self-importance. "I am Uchiha Madara." The cavern held its breath, and then Akira laughed. It came suddenly, unrestrained, a genuine, disbelieving burst of laughter that rang off the stone walls and multiplied in the dark, filling every corner of the cave until it felt as though the cavern itself were laughing along with him. Beneath the mask, the man's single visible eye narrowed. "What is so funny?" Akira's laughter slowly faded. He wiped the corner of his eye with the back of his hand, drew a breath, and looked directly at the swirled mask, and smiled, calm and knowing. "Do you know," he said, "why the Uchiha clan isn't particularly famous for producing wise men?" The masked man's eye narrowed further. "What do you mean?" "Because knowledge creates stability," Akira answered, his voice even, almost gentle, as though explaining something to a child. "The more a person understands the world, the calmer they become. And the calmer they become, the harder it becomes to awaken the Mangekyo Sharingan." He let the words settle before continuing. "The Mangekyo is born from emotional collapse, from hatred, from unbearable loss, from instability." He raised a hand, pointing calmly toward the man across from him. "So, if someone possesses the Mangekyo Sharingan, they are, by definition, already mentally unstable." The cave fell silent again. Akira's smile widened, thin and sharp. "Like you." The masked man's expression darkened behind his disguise, his voice dropping into something colder. "What are you trying to imply?" Akira folded his arms, unbothered. "You're pretending to be Uchiha Madara. But tell me, do you know the one characteristic about Madara that no one in history can deny?" "What?" the man asked, each word clipped now, patience thinning. Akira's eyes sharpened, all traces of amusement burning away into something colder, more precise. "Madara never ran," he said. "No matter how many enemies stood before him, no matter how hopeless the battle, no one has ever seen Madara Uchiha flee. He either advanced, or he fought until the very end." He took a step forward, and his voice rose, filling the cavern like a struck bell. "You kidnapped me. That part was clever. But afterward, you fled. You didn't even dare face the Uchiha clan. You escaped without exchanging a single proper blow." He pointed at the masked man, unflinching. "So don't stand there claiming to be Madara. The real Madara would never act like a coward. You are nothing more than a thief hiding behind another man's name." Something in Akira's face broke. For the first time since the void had swallowed him, for the first time in longer than he could remember, his composure cracked entirely. The calm, unreadable mask he always wore split open, and beneath it was fury, raw and unguarded, trembling in his voice as he finally let it loose. So stop staining our ancestors' name. His shout tore through the cavern, and the stone itself seemed to shudder under the weight of it. You bastard. It wasn't only anger at the man before him. It was something else, too, the frustration that had been building for months, now finally given a place to go. The Uchiha clan had just begun to change. For the first time in years, they had started walking towards something better than rebellion, better than the quiet hatred that had festered in the district for a generation. The council had united. The elders had finally chosen reform over bloodshed. They had been one step, only one, from cornering Hiruzen politically, from forcing change without a single drop of blood spilled. And at that exact moment, he had been torn away from all of it. How could he possibly stay calm? The masked man said nothing for several long seconds, absorbing the outburst in silence. Then, from beneath the mask, a low chuckle emerged, quiet at first, then unmistakable. So, he said, you aren't afraid of me. Akira only stared back, breathing hard, saying nothing. The man's voice dropped, almost gentle in its cruelty. I could kill you right now. No one knows where you are. No one can save you. You would disappear from this world, and no one would ever find your body. Akira's expression shifted again, not into fear, but into something quieter. A small, calm smile touched his lips. It wasn't mocking. It was almost peaceful. Who exactly? He said softly, are you trying to frighten? He looked straight into the crimson eye watching him from the dark. I've already faced death once. I've already accepted it. So, I don't fear dying. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The cavern held its silence like a held breath, water dripping somewhere in the dark, the torches hissing faintly against the damp air. The masked man studied him, searching, it seemed, for some crack, some flicker of the fear he was so certain must be there. He found none. Unable to shake him. Unable to understand him. Finally, he gave a short, cold snort. HMPH. We'll see how long that confidence lasts. Space folded around him once more, the spiral opening at his back like a wound in the air. Without another word, his figure dissolved into the distortion and was gone, the tear ceiling shut behind him as though it had never existed. The cavern returned to silence. Only Akira remained, standing alone in the cold, damp dark, staring at the empty space where the masked man had vanished. Slowly, the tension left his shoulders. His breathing steadied. The fire that had burned so openly in his eyes moments ago folded itself back beneath the surface, hidden once more behind that same unreadable calm. But something had changed. His eyes, closed for a moment in the stillness, began to open again, slowly, deliberately, and where the familiar black had been, a deep crimson now bloomed, two dark tomo drifting lazily into place within each iris. The Sharingan awakened. Akira exhaled, calm settling over him once more, as if nothing at all had happened, as if everything that had just occurred was merely the beginning. Underground. Root headquarters. Danzo Shimura's underground headquarters was as silent as a grave. Buried far beneath the streets of Konoha, where no sunlight had ever touched stone, the root base existed in a permanent, suffocating dusk. Torches lined the walls at wide intervals, their flames burning low and steady, throwing more shadow than light across the chamber. The air was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, the kind of cold that came from a place where laughter had never once echoed, where no child's voice had ever been raised without purpose. Rows of masked root shinobi lined the walls on either side of the chamber, standing in perfect, unnatural stillness. No one shifted their weight. No one breathed loud enough to hear. They did not look like soldiers waiting for orders. They looked like statues carved in the shape of men, hollowed out long ago and filled instead with obedience. At the far end of the chamber, Danzo Shimura sat waiting, his cane resting against the arm of his seat, his bandaged arm folded into his robes. His single visible eye did not blink. It simply watched the empty air before him, patient, unmoving, as though he already knew exactly what was coming and had merely been waiting for the world to catch up to him. Then the air split open. A spiral tore into existence in the space before him, distorting the dim torchlight around its edges, and Obito stepped through it without the slightest hesitation, as one entering a room he considered, in every sense that mattered, already his. He simply stood there, arms loose at his sides, his masked face tilted toward Danzo with the casual ease of someone who had never once in his life considered himself beneath another man's authority. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, thick and deliberate, until Obito finally broke it, unhurried, almost bored. Akira, he said, is no more. He said it the way another man might mention the weather. No wait. No ceremony. As if the death of the single greatest threat to Danzo's ambitions were a matter of no more consequence to him than brushing dust from his cloak. For the briefest instant, Danzo's composure held, the same iron stillness he had worn for decades, the mask he never let slip in front of others. Then it cracked. His visible eye widened, just slightly, and something moved behind it that might have been hunger, or might have been disbelief that fate had finally handed him what he wanted. What? His voice was quiet, controlled, but beneath it ran a current of something almost eager. He rose slowly from his seat, his grip tightening around the head of his cane until his knuckles paled. You are certain? Obito tilted his head, and though the mask hid his expression, the amusement in his voice needed no face to be seen. Do you think, he said, I would waste my time coming here to tell you a lie? It wasn't a denial. It wasn't reassurance, either. It was closer to a warning, a reminder, delivered with lazy confidence, that Obito answered to no one in this room, least of all the old man with his cane and his bandaged arm and his army of hollowed-out children. He had not come here because Danzo commanded it. He had come because it amused him to watch what Danzo would do next. I confirmed it myself, Obito added, and even that felt less like proof and more like a favor he had decided, on a whim, to grant. A long silence filled the underground chamber, broken only by the faint, restless crackle of torch flame against damp stone. Danzo closed his eye. For a moment, he said nothing at all, simply stood there in the dark. Uchiha Akira had been the one variable he could not control. The one voice capable of uniting a fractured clan behind reform instead of rebellion. The one obstacle standing between Danzo and the justification he had spent years quietly, patiently constructing. Now that obstacle was gone. The corner of his mouth curved. Good. When he spoke again, all trace of restraint had vanished from his voice, replaced by something flat and merciless, the voice of a man who had made peace with atrocity long before this night. It's time, he said. It's time we wipe the Uchiha clan from history. Obito said nothing. He simply stood at the center of it all, masked face unreadable, watching Danzo's plans unfold exactly as he had known they would. Meanwhile, far from the tangled webs of political scheming, far from council chambers and clan intrigue, another kind of drama was unfolding, one considerably less dignified. Jiraiya crouched low behind the wooden fence of a women's public bathhouse, his broad frame folded into an almost comical hunch as he pressed one eye to a narrow crack in the boards. A grin, utterly shameless, utterly unrepentant, spread across his face. He. As expected, he murmured to himself, voice hushed with reverence, true artistic inspiration only comes from real-life research. In one hand he clutched a small, well-worn notebook, its pages soft from years of handling. With the intense focus of a man decoding ancient scripture, he scribbled furiously, pausing only to glance back through the crack for reference. Chapter 12, he whispered, mouthing the words as he wrote. The steam of youth. He sighed dreamily. Beautiful. Just then, whoosh. A masked figure appeared beside him in a silent blur of motion. An Anbu operative, kneeling with practiced discipline. Lord Jiraiya. Jiraiya nearly leapt out of his own skin. He spun around so fast he almost toppled backward into the dirt, one hand flying up to clamp over the Anbu's masked mouth. Though the mask made the gesture rather pointless, the other pressed frantically against his own lips. Shish. He hissed, eyes wide with panic. Quiet. Do you have any idea what you almost did? Do you want to ruin my masterpiece? But the damage was already done. Inside the bathhouse, one of the women had caught the flicker of movement through the fence, a shadow where no shadow should be. Her eyes went wide. Then wider still. Ah. Her scream tore through the steam-filled air like a kunai. There's a pervert. What had been a peaceful afternoon of quiet bathing exploded into absolute chaos. Splash. Crash. Buckets sailed over the fence like mortar shells. Wooden mugs followed, then bars of soap, then entire wash basins, hurled with the terrifying accuracy of women who had clearly dealt with peeping toms before. You shameless old man. Die, you pervert. Jiraiya's face drained of all color. Run. The Anbu didn't need to be told twice. In the space of a heartbeat, the two of them vanished in a blur of speed, leaving behind only a rain of flying bathhouse debris and a chorus of furious shrieks. Several minutes later, in the quiet safety of a roadside inn far from the scene of the crime, Jiraiya finally allowed himself to breathe. He let out a long, weary sigh and discreetly tucked his precious notebook back into the folds of his robe, as though it had never left. Then he coughed once, straightened his posture, and attempted, rather unconvincingly, to look like a man of dignity and purpose. So, he said, folding his arms with an air of practiced nonchalance. What news brings Anbu all the way out here? The masked ninja bowed respectfully, seemingly choosing not to comment on the events of the last minutes. Lord Jiraiya. The third Hokage has summoned you back to the village. There will soon be a selection for the next Hokage. Jiraiya blinked, caught off guard. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face, and he leaned back in his chair with theatrical relief. Finally, he said, that old man has come to his senses. He's been sitting in that chair for far too long. He crossed his arms, satisfaction written plainly across his features. So, who's the unlucky soul? The Anbu answered without a flicker of hesitation. You, Lord Jiraiya. Silence. What? Jiraiya pointed at his own chest, as though there might be some mistake, some other Jiraiya standing behind him. Me. No. No. I don't want it. Go back and tell the old man to find someone else. The Anbu remained kneeling, unmoved. I'm afraid, he can't. Jiraiya's grin faltered, replaced by a frown. What do you mean? The third Hokage is about to be impeached. The relaxed amusement drained from Jiraiya's face in an instant, replaced by something sharper, more alert. What? The old man's being impeached. Why? The Anbu's voice remained level, measured, delivering the words like a report he had rehearsed. The Uchiha clan has begun openly challenging the current administration. They are demanding that the next Hokage come from their clan. Jiraiya scratched the back of his head, disbelief written across his face. What is wrong with those Uchiha? Can't they ever just stay quiet? The Uchiha have gained tremendous political momentum over the past year, the Anbu continued. They have successfully changed the villagers' opinion of them. This has been in preparation for a long time. And now, they possess the daimyo's official seal. Jiraiya's eyes narrowed, all traces of humor gone now. The daimyo approved it. The Anbu nodded once. Yes. Lord Third cannot reject the order. He already abdicated once, after the Third Great Ninja War. His current position was only ever meant to be temporary. A pause. Then, quieter, heavier. The only candidates eligible to become the fifth Hokage are you, and Lady Tsunade. We have searched everywhere. We still cannot locate her. The Anbu lowered his head. Please, Lord Jiraiya. Return to Konoha. From within his robes, he produced an official scroll, sealed with the mark of the Hokage's office, and held it out. The Hokage-sama has officially terminated your intelligence-gathering mission. You are ordered to return to the village immediately. The message delivered, the Anbu rose to his feet. Please, come with me. Jiraiya stared at him for a long moment, expression unreadable. Wait a minute. He scratched the back of his head, an oddly sheepish smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. This, he gestured vaguely at himself, is actually my shadow clone. The Anbu froze mid-motion, his composure cracking for the first time. What? Before he could react further, the clone gave a lazy, two-fingered wave. I'm going to go look for Tsunade. Tell the old man that. Poof. The clone dissolved into a puff of smoke, leaving the Anbu alone in stunned silence. At that very same moment, far away, the real Jiraiya stood perched high on the branch of an ancient tree, overlooking yet another women's bathhouse. A small telescope was pressed to one eye, his focus absolute, his breathing measured like a hunter stalking prey. He chuckled softly to himself. Now this is the perfect observation point. Then, disaster. One of the women below happened to glance upward at the light reflection. She froze, eyes locking onto the unmistakable silhouette perched in the branches above. Her face flushed a deep, furious red. Ah! She shrieked. There's someone in the tree. Jiraiya's eyes went wide with horror. Oh, crap. He didn't waste a second. He leapt from the branch, hit the ground running, and tore off down the path at a speed that would have impressed even his fellow Sannin. Behind him, a furious chorus of voices rose in pursuit, swarming after him like hornets from a kicked nest. Catch him. That shameless pervert. He ducked around a startled vendor's cart, sending a basket of apples tumbling into the dirt, and kept sprinting, lungs burning, sandals kicking up clouds of dust. It was only after several blocks, after the shouting had faded to a distant murmur and his pounding heart had settled into something resembling a normal rhythm, that his mind finally caught up with the absurdity of it all. He slowed to a jog, then a brisk walk, shaking his head with a rueful chuckle. Damn it, he muttered under his breath, still catching his wind. You'd think after all these years I'd have learned to pick better hiding spots. Then, unbidden, the Anbu's words drifted back to him. The only candidates eligible are you and Lady Tsunade, and his expression soured all over again. Hokage, he scoffed, kicking a stray pebble off the road. Why does everyone keep trying to saddle me with that headache? Sitting behind a desk all day, drowning in paperwork, arguing with the council over budgets and border disputes. No thank you. He exhaled sharply through his nose, running a hand back through his wild white hair. No, he said, more to himself than anyone. Better I go find Tsunade. She's the sensible choice anyway, if we can just track her down before she gambles herself into another debt spiral. Decision made, he ducked behind a cluster of trees a short distance off the road, out of sight from any curious eyes. He bit down hard on his thumb, drawing a thin line of blood, and pressed his palm to the ground. Reverse summoning jutsu. Smoke erupted around him in a thick, swirling cloud, and in the next instant, Jiraiya was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but settling dust, a trail of angry shouts fading into the distance, and a bathhouse full of very unimpressed women. Mount Myoboku. A cloud of white smoke exploded across the massive stone platform, and Jiraiya stepped out of it, brushing the dust from his robes with the easy familiarity. He rolled his shoulders and stretched, drawing in a long breath of the cool, mist-laden air. Finally, he muttered, a lazy grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. It's always nice coming back here. He had barely taken a step toward the winding paths beyond the platform when a small messenger toad came bounding toward him at full speed, its little legs a blur against the stone. Lord Jiraiya. Jiraiya glanced down, one brow lifting. The toad skidded to a stop and bowed low, its voice quick and urgent. Lord Great Sage Gamamaru has summoned you. It is extremely urgent. The easy warmth drained from Jiraiya's face in an instant. His eyes narrowed, the grin gone as quickly as it had come. Did the Great Sage already learn about the Hokage impeachment? He wondered, the thought settling over him like a stone dropped into still water. He gave a single, wordless nod. Lead the way. The messenger toad turned at once and hopped deeper into the winding paths of Mount Myoboku, and Jiraiya followed in silence, his usual easy stride replaced by something tighter, more deliberate, a man bracing himself for news he suspected he wouldn't like. A short while later, they arrived at the Grand Hall of the Great Sage. The chamber swallowed sound the moment Jiraiya stepped through its threshold. Towering stone pillars, worn smooth by centuries beyond counting, rose toward a ceiling lost somewhere in shadow, and countless candles lined the walls, their flames burning low and gold, casting a warm, trembling light over everything and nothing at once. At the very heart of the hall sat the oldest being in all of Mount Myoboku, the Great Sage Gamamaru. The enormous orange toad sat motionless, eyes closed, so still that he might have been carved from the same ancient stone as the pillars around him. Jiraiya crossed the hall and stopped a respectful distance away. He pressed his fists together and lowered his head, the reverence in the gesture as automatic as breathing. Before he could speak a single word of greeting, Gamamaru's eyes opened, slowly, deliberately, carrying behind them a weight of centuries Jiraiya could never hope to measure. Jiraiya, the old sage said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to rise from the stone itself rather than his throat. My child. You are finally here. Jiraiya bowed again, deeper this time. Great sage. Why have you summoned me so urgently? For a long moment, Gamamaru said nothing at all. The candle flames swayed faintly, though no wind stirred within the sealed chamber. Then the ancient toad's expression shifted, subtly, but unmistakably, into something graver than Jiraiya had ever seen him wear. Jiraiya, he said again, slower this time. Someone has altered the timeline. The words fell into the silence of the hall and did not fade. They seemed, instead, to linger in the air, echoing faintly against the stone as though the chamber itself were reluctant to let them go. Jiraiya blinked. The timeline. His brow furrowed, confusion tightening across his face. What does that even mean? Gamamaru continued, each word measured, deliberate, heavy with meaning Jiraiya could only half grasp. An anomaly has appeared. It has greatly changed the destined flow of future. The future I once saw has become blurred. The world has entered an uncertain path. Jiraiya's expression sobered with every word. The playful ease he'd carried onto the platform minutes ago was gone entirely now, and even the air of the hull seemed to press down on his shoulders, thick with a weight he couldn't name. The child of the prophecy, Gamamaru went on, has also been affected. The future surrounding that child is no longer clear. If this anomaly continues to exist, the entire world may fall into catastrophe. Something cold settled in Jiraiya's chest. He had known Gamamaru for decades, had come to this hall countless times over the years, had heard the old sage speak of destiny, of prophecy, of futures glimpsed through eyes older than the village itself. Never once, in all that time, had he heard him speak with this kind of urgency. Slowly, the great sage lifted his massive head. You must protect the child of the prophecy, he said, and eliminate the one who changed the timeline. Jiraiya's eyes went wide. What? The word came out sharper than he intended. You want me to kill someone? For the first time in his life, the great sage Gamamaru had looked him in the eye and ordered him to take a life. Not warned him. Not hinted. Ordered. Jiraiya couldn't hide the shock on his face. He stepped forward, closing the respectful distance he'd kept only moments ago. Who is it? He pressed. What is this person's name? Gamamaru's mouth opened. And then, without warning, his eyelids began to droop. Great sage. Within seconds, he was asleep, his enormous head sinking slightly, his breathing slowing into the deep, even rhythm of true slumber. Jiraiya froze mid-step. Great sage. Nothing. Great sage. He hurried closer, urgency breaking through his usual composure. Who is he? Tell me, what is his name? Several tense seconds crawled by, the silence of the hull pressing in from every side. Then, just when Jiraiya had nearly given up, Gamamaru's eyes cracked open again. Barely a sliver, his voice thick and slurred with sleep. Uchiha. Ak. His head dipped. And he was gone again, sinking fully back into sleep, soft snores rolling through the chamber like distant thunder. Z's. Jiraiya stared at him, disbelief plain on his face. Uchiha. Ak. He repeated the fragment aloud, as if saying it again might somehow force the rest of the name free. Uchiha who? He waited. The snoring continued, undisturbed, oblivious to the storm of questions Jiraiya was drowning in. No matter how many times he called out after that, the great sage did not stir again. From the side of the hall, another elder toad shuffled forward, his expression apologetic but resigned, the look of someone who had witnessed this exact scene play out more times than he could count. Lord Jiraiya. He sighed, long and weary. The great sage has fallen asleep again. Once he enters this state, no one knows when he will wake. You should leave. Jiraiya lingered a moment longer, staring at the sleeping form of the ancient toad, half hoping the old sage might stir once more and finish what he'd started. He didn't. Reluctantly, Jiraiya nodded. I understand. With a soft puff of smoke, he vanished from the hall. A moment later, Jiraiya reappeared atop a rocky cliff on the far edge of Land of Fire, the wilderness stretching out endlessly beneath him, an ocean of dark forest under a pale, indifferent sky. The wind moved through his long white hair, cool and steady, but it did nothing to ease the tension coiled in his shoulders. His expression had lost every trace of the easygoing warmth he usually wore. What remained was sharper, colder. Someone changed the timeline. Asterisk he thought, his hand slowly closing into a fist at his side. Asterisk in all these years, the great sage has never once ordered me to kill anyone. He turned the thought over again and again, searching for some angle that made it easier to accept, and finding none. Whoever this person is, he must be capable of causing a disaster unlike anything this world has ever seen. He closed his eyes, letting the fragment of a name echo once more through his mind. Uchiha. Ak. Who is this Uchiha? He murmured to the empty air. Slowly, he opened his eyes again, his gaze settling on the dark line of the horizon. Then he stopped. Wait. A memory surfaced, sudden and sharp, an Anbu messenger, hours ago, catching him just before he'd left for Mount Myoboku. News of Hiruzen sensei's impeachment. The Uchiha clan pushing it, united and relentless. Uchiha. His eyes narrowed. Could this, Uchiha Ak, be tied to it somehow? The same clan, moving against Sarutobi sensei. It was too close to be coincidence. He could feel it. At least I know one thing. His voice was quiet now, resolved. He's from Konoha. I have to investigate it myself. A pause. The wind stirred around him, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. If he truly threatens the future. His gaze hardened, all warmth gone from it now, replaced by the flat, unflinching resolve of a man who had made his decision. Then I must kill him. Without another word, he leapt from the cliff's edge. Boom. The stone cracked beneath the force of his landing far below, and in the space of a heartbeat, he was gone, a streak of white and red vanishing into the endless green toward the eastern forests. On the other side, inside the Hokage's office, an unusually heavy silence filled the room. Hiruzen Sarutobi sat behind his desk, hands folded before him, his aged face drawn with the particular exhaustion of a man who had not slept properly for a long time. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper tonight, carved by more than age alone. To his right, Danzo Shimura sat with his usual stillness, both hands resting atop his cane. The two elders, Homura Mitokado and Kaharu Yutane, occupied the remaining seats, their expressions carefully neutral. No one spoke. The silence stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring, until it seemed the room itself was holding its breath. Whoosh. An ando dropped into a kneel at the center of the room. Lord Hokage. Hiruzen looked up, bracing himself. What did Jiraiya say? The ando hesitated, as if reluctant to repeat the words. Lord Jiraiya said, I'm going to go look for Tsunade. For a moment, Hiruzen simply stared at him. Then something in his expression darkened. That fool. He struck the desk with the flat of his hand, sharper than he intended. Nothing is going the way it should. Not one thing. The room absorbed his anger in silence. Even the elders did not dare speak. It was Danzo who broke it, his voice cutting through calmly, almost too calmly. Hiruzen. He waited until every eye had turned to him. Uchiha Akira is no more. Hiruzen's hand stilled on the desk. For a long moment he only stared, the anger draining out of his face and leaving something raw behind it. Disbelief, quickly swallowed. You're certain? Our intelligence has confirmed it. Hiruzen let out a slow breath, and when he spoke again, it was quieter, almost grudging. I can always rely on you, Danzo. Danzo inclined his head, the faintest satisfaction in his single visible eye. Then it hardened again. The greatest obstacle before us is gone. There is no one left to stand in our way. He leaned forward slightly, voice dropping colder still. The time has come to deal with the Uchiha, to put them in their place, before they can rise again. Hiruzen closed his eyes. No one in the room knew what he was thinking. Meanwhile, inside the Uchiha compound, the air felt entirely different. There was no celebration here, only grief, quiet and unspoken. The streets that were usually alive with chatter and footsteps had gone still, as though the whole clan were holding its breath. Even the children, gathered in small clusters near the doorways, played without their usual laughter, glancing now and then toward the adults. Hushed, worried faces. No one had said it outright. No one needed to. The same rumor had reached every household by now, passed from one grim face to the next in whispers too heavy to speak aloud. Uchiha Akira had disappeared. Inside the Uchiha High Council Hall, it smelled of old cedar and cold incense, the kind of scent that had soaked into the beams over generations and never quite left. Torchlight flickered against the fan-crested banners lining the walls, throwing long shadows across the stone floor. Shadows that seemed to lean toward the man seated at the head of the room, as if even they were waiting for him to speak. Clan leader Fugaku sat upon the highest seat, spine straight out of habit rather than will. Around him, in a wide unbroken circle, sat the 12 clan elders, their faces carved from the same stern granite as the founders whose portraits hung above them. Before the dais, more than 30 elite Uchiha Jonin stood in perfect formation, and not one of them dared to shift their weight. Every face in that hall was solemn. The air itself felt heavy, pressed down by something unspoken. One Jonin finally broke from the line and stepped forward, bowing low. Clan leader. His voice was steady, trained to be steady, though his knuckles were pale where his hand gripped his own wrist behind his back. We searched every corner of Konoha, every district, every safe house. He paused, and the pause said more than the words that followed. We could not find Lord Akira anywhere. It is as though he vanished from this world. A second Jonin, older, with a scar bisecting one eyebrow, stepped up beside him to continue the report. We extended the search across the entire land of fire, tracking for any trace of his chakra signature. He shook his head slowly. There was nothing. Not a flicker, not a residue. We believe whoever took him possesses an extremely advanced space-time ninjutsu, something capable of erasing a trail entirely. He could be anywhere now, any village, any country. Fugaku said nothing. He simply listened, utterly still, betraying nothing. But the dark circles beneath his eyes told a different story than his composure did. They had deepened by the day, until now they looked less like fatigue and more like bruises, the kind a man earns from staring at the ceiling of his own bedroom night after night, waiting for a sleep that refuses to come. The silence stretched. No one moved to fill it. At last, Fugaku spoke, and his voice came out lower than he intended. Did you identify the masked man? The lead Jonin nodded once, sharply. Yes, clan leader. We managed to gather some information. He hesitated, choosing his next words with visible care. Our spies believe he is a member of the Akatsuki. The murmur that swept through the council was immediate and low, like wind moving through dry grass. Elders exchanged glances. One gripped the arm of his chair. The Jonin pressed on before the murmurs could grow. Roughly 3 months ago, one of our informants reported sighting someone matching his description near the hidden mist. Unfortunately, that is where the trail ends. We have no information regarding his current whereabouts. Fugaku's fingers curled around the armrest of his chair until the wood creaked faintly under the strain. The room fell silent again, the particular silence of people who have run out of things to report and are afraid of what comes next. Then, breaking through it, knock, knock. Every head in the hall turned toward the entrance. An elderly Uchiha man shuffled in, a large cloth bag slung over one stooped shoulder. His robes were plain and worn soft with age, the kind of clothes that had seen decades of honest work. Needles of every size and a cloth measuring tape hung from a cord at his waist, swaying faintly with each step. It was Genzo, the tailor who had clothed 3 generations of Uchiha children, and who looked, in that moment, entirely out of place among the assembled Jonin. Fugaku's brow furrowed. Genzo. Why are you here? Genzo bowed as deeply as his old back would allow. Clan leader. Forgive the intrusion. I came looking for Lord Uchiha Akira. Something in Fugaku's expression tightened. What business do you have with him? The old man's hands, weathered and steady from a lifetime of careful stitching, tightened gently around the bag as though it held something precious. Lord Akira commissioned several sets of clothing from me. The order was completed yesterday morning, but he never came to collect it. He lowered his eyes. So I thought, I should deliver it to him myself. Fugaku was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had softened, almost against his will. What did he order? Genzo shuffled closer, knees cracking softly with each step, and lowered the bag onto the long table before the dais. He untied the cord with careful, practiced fingers, and one by one, began laying out the neatly folded garments inside, each one pressed and perfect. His aged voice carried a warmth that felt almost unbearable in that cold hall. Tomorrow, the Ninja Academy begins its new term. He smoothed a wrinkle from the first garment before continuing. Lord Akira told me that he is attending the entrance ceremony as Sasuke's guardian. He unfolded a small blue shirt, the Uchiha fan crest stitched carefully over the heart. He ordered new clothes specially for young Master Sasuke. He told me. Genzo's voice caught, just slightly, and he pressed on. He said, Sasuke is 6 years old now. His old clothes won't fit him anymore. The old man set the shirt down as gently as if it were made of glass, his smile carrying more sorrow than joy. Then he reached into the bag again and drew out a second garment, same size but an orange color outfit. And these, he said quietly. He ordered these as well. He told me they were for another child. I don't know who. No one in the hall spoke. No one dared to. Finally, Genzo unfolded the last piece, a dark blue Uchiha robe, tailored with the quiet dignity of formal wear, the kind a man might wear to stand proudly beside his family on an important day. This one, Genzo said softly, was made for Lord Akira himself. The chamber fell into a silence so complete it seemed to swallow even the torchlight. No one spoke. No one moved. Every eye in that hall was fixed on the small collection of folded cloth resting on the table. Clothes meant for a day that had already been planned, a future that had already been chosen, by a man who was no longer there to see it through. Understanding settled over the room all at once, heavy and undeniable. Akira had been planning for tomorrow. He had expected to stand beside Sasuke. He had wanted, more than anything, to watch the boy take his very first step into the Ninja Academy. But he would never be there to see it. Several of the elders lowered their heads, unable to look any longer at the little blue shirt with its careful stitching. One elder's shoulders trembled, and he did not bother to hide the tears that slid down his weathered face. Even the Jonin, men and women who had faced death without flinching, found themselves looking away, throats tight, unable to hold their composure in front of a folded unclaimed robe. Fugaku stared at the garments. Then, unbidden, a memory rose from somewhere deep and half forgotten. Several weeks earlier, Akira had stood before him, wearing a rare, unguarded smile, the kind he almost never allowed himself in front of the clan leader. Clan leader. May I attend Sasuke's entrance ceremony? I want to represent him as his guardian. Fugaku had barely lifted his eyes from the documents scattered across his desk. It's a small matter, he'd said, already turning back to his paperwork. You have my permission. The memory dissolved as quickly as it had come. Fugaku returned to the present, to the hall, to the robe that would never be worn, and found he could not look away from it. For the first time in longer than he could remember, something other than duty moved through his chest. Regret. Sharp, sudden, and far too late. If only I had protected him that day. The thought settled into him like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything he thought he understood about strength, about leadership. Fugaku lifted his gaze slowly toward the back of the hall. Itachi. Shisui. The two young prodigies stepped forward at once, moving in perfect unison. Clan leader, they said together. Fugaku reached down and gathered neatly folded clothes into both hands, holding them with a care that looked almost foreign on him. When he spoke, his voice had lost its usual iron edge. Take these. He held them out, and Shisui accepted them without a word, cradling the robes as though it weighed far more than cloth should. Fugaku looked between the two young men, and for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid passed silently between them. Tomorrow, he said. Attend Sasuke's entrance ceremony. A painful silence filled the hall. No one needed to say another word. Everyone understood. Late that evening, the massive gates of Konoha stood peacefully beneath the setting sun. Gold light spilled over the village walls in long, dying rays, catching on rooftops and painting the dust of the road amber. Merchants and travelers filed in through the gate in twos and threes, hurrying now, their carts creaking as they raced the closing hour. A sudden gust of wind swept across the entrance, rattling the lanterns hung along the gatepost. Whoosh! Jiraiya landed silently before the gates, his sandals barely stirring the dust. The two gate guards recognized him at once. Their eyes went wide, and whatever idle conversation had passed between them died instantly. Lord Jiraiya. Both men bowed low, the kind of bow reserved only for the Sannin. You've returned. One of them straightened first, stepping forward with the stiff formality of a man determined not to embarrass himself in front of a legend. Lord Third Hokage has been waiting for your arrival. Please, come with us. Jiraiya waved a hand, already looking past them toward the darkening village beyond. There's no need for that. His voice was easy, almost lazy, but there was something underneath it, a weight the guards were too junior to notice. I'll meet the old man later. There's something more important I need to look into first. Before either guard could so much as open his mouth to protest. Whoosh. He was gone. The two guards looked at each other, equal parts exasperated and resigned. Just like always, one of them muttered, shaking his head, and went back to watching the road. Moments later, in the hush of a quiet side alley, Jiraiya pressed his hands together in a quick seal. Transformation jutsu. Poof. His appearance folded in on itself and reshaped. The long white mane shortened into something gray and unkempt. Deep wrinkles etched themselves into skin that had, a heartbeat ago, belonged to a man in his prime. His traveling clothes turned plain and threadbare, the garb of an old wanderer who had seen too many roads and cared for none of them. No one looking at him now would ever guess they were standing beside one of the 3 legendary Sannin. Satisfied, he tucked his hands into his sleeves and shuffled toward the noise and light spilling from one of Konoha's busiest taverns. Inside, the tavern was alive with the particular chaos of a village trying to forget its troubles for one night. Shinobi leaned over half-empty cups beside merchants loosening their belts after long hauls. Laughter rose and fell in waves, thick with the smell of sake and grilled skewers. Jiraiya settled onto a stool near the counter, folding himself into the posture of a tired old man who wanted nothing more than a drink and some company. He ordered, and while the cup was poured, he let his ears do the real work. Say, he rasped to the bartender, a broad-shouldered man named Tetsu who'd clearly heard every rumor the village had to offer. When's the Uchiha district opening back up? Bartender shrugged as he wiped down the counter. No idea. Nobody tells us anything anymore. Before Jiraiya could press further, the man drinking beside him, a wiry, red-faced fellow named Denji, 3 cups deep already, let out a long, mournful sigh. Man, I miss that place. He stared into his cup like it had personally wronged him. Their tavern served the best booze in the Fire Country, and during festivals, they just gave it away. Free drinks, free food, the whole street lit up like New Year's. A few heads nearby nodded along. Yeah, someone else agreed. Haven't had sake that good in months. At that moment, a middle-aged man with the unmistakable dark eyes of the Uchiha clan lowered himself onto the stool beside them, arms full of shopping bags that he set down with a grunt. He caught the tail end of the conversation and chuckled, a short, knowing sound. I know exactly why the district's still closed. Immediately, half the counter leaned in. Really? What happened? The Uchiha man, his name was Sadao, and he ran a modest food shop just inside the district's east gate, took a slow sip from his cup, savoring the attention as much as the drink. I own a shop in there, he said at last. You want to know what happened? The Hokage's administration cut off nearly every source of income the clan had. Every one of us who ran a business inside those walls got the same notice. Hand over a large cut of your profits to the higher council, or lose your permits. The tavern went up like dry kindling. What? That's daylight robbery. Seriously. A merchant near the back slammed his mug down hard enough to slosh sake over his knuckles. If they wanted businesses, they should have built their own instead of bleeding Uchiha dry. What kind of leader does that to his own villagers? A chorus of agreement rippled through the room, voices overlapping, indignant. Sadao nodded, milking the moment for all it was worth. Exactly. Honestly, the Hokage should just step down. Let an Uchiha take the seat for once. He raised his cup with a wide, half-drunk grin. And if that ever happens, I'll personally see to it that everyone in this tavern drinks for free. Every night. The room erupted into laughter, someone pounding the table in delight. Now that's a Hokage worth supporting. Ha ha ha. In the corner, hunched over his own untouched cup, Jiraiya's eyes narrowed beneath the folds of his disguise. They're planting seeds, he thought, watching the laughter without joining it. Slowly. Carefully. Turning grievances into loyalty. He said nothing. I'd rather see the district with my own eyes. He left a few coins on the counter and slipped out into the night without a backward glance. A few minutes later, Jiraiya arrived at the edge of the Uchiha district and stopped walking entirely. What? Above him, buildings rose in clean, towering lines against the darkening sky, their silhouettes sharp and deliberate. Wide stone roads stretched out in every direction, smooth and evenly laid, wider than anything else in the village. Elegant street lamps lined the avenues, their light steady and warm, illuminating corners that in the rest of Konoha would have been left to shadow. Compared to the streets he'd just walked through, this place looked like it belonged to a different decade entirely, maybe a different era. Jiraiya stood very still, taking it in. These buildings. This infrastructure. His gaze traced the clean lines of the nearest rooftop, the precision of the stonework beneath his feet. This isn't something an ordinary clan just builds. Someone planned every inch of this. Who designed all of this? Before he could take another step toward the gate, whoosh, 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 whoosh. 4 shapes dropped into a loose circle around him, cutting off every angle of retreat. 4 Uchiha Jonin, and every one of them had already activated the 3 Tomo Sharingan, crimson eyes glowing faintly in the lamplight, eyes that saw straight through his transformation jutsu as if it were painted glass. One of them, a lean man with a scar tracing his jaw, named Iso, spoke first, his voice flat and cold. What are you doing here, Lord Jiraiya? Jiraiya let out a long breath through his nose. So much for disguises. Poof. The transformation dissolved. His true form returned, the wild white hair, the broad shoulders, the face the entire elemental nations would have recognized in an instant. He looked around the circle of Jonin calmly, unhurried, as if being surrounded by 4 activated Sharingan was little more than an inconvenience. So, he said, tone almost conversational. Are you planning to throw the village into civil war? The words had barely left his mouth before one of the Jonin snapped. It was Iso. His Sharingan spun violently, fury contorting his features as both hands flew to the hilts of his twin swords. You bastard. You're accusing us. His swords cleared their sheaths halfway. I'm going to. Before he could finish, 3 hands seized his shoulders and yanked him backward. Lord Iso. Stop. The Jonin who had grabbed him, a broader man named Renji, kept his grip firm even as Iso strained against it. Don't be impulsive. This is exactly what they want from us. Renji's voice dropped, urgent and low. They're waiting for us to make the first move. If we attack a Sanin inside our own district, we hand them the perfect excuse to burn everything we've built to the ground. A third Jonin, quieter, a woman named Chika, stepped in beside them, her expression tight with restrained anger of her own. We're too close now, she said. Don't ruin it over a provocation. She hesitated, then lowered her voice further, as if the name itself carried weight. And if Lord Akira were here to see this, he'd be furious with you. The moment Akira's name left her lips, something in Iso seemed to falter. His ragged breathing slowed, the murderous edge in his Sharingan dimming by degrees. After several long seconds, he exhaled and let his swords drop back into their sheaths. You're right, he muttered, jaw still tight. Forgive me. On the other side of the circle, Jiraiya's pupils contracted sharply. Uchiha Akira. So that's the name the great sage of six paths couldn't finish. His eyes swept once more across the towering rooftops, the impossibly smooth roads, the lamplight that never seemed to flicker. All of this, he thought, the pieces sliding into place with an unease he didn't like. Was this Akira's doing? All of it. No wonder the great sage thought this man capable of changing the course of history. His expression hardened. He looked directly at the four Jonin, and when he spoke again, all trace of the tired old drunk was gone from his voice. I came to meet Uchiha Akira. Call him out. The words had barely settled in the air before the temperature around him seemed to drop. All four Uchiha turned their bloodshot Sharingan on him at once, and the hatred radiating off them was thick enough that even Jiraiya, a man who had stared down S-rank missing Nin without blinking, felt it settle uncomfortably against his skin. Iso stepped forward, his voice low and shaking with something closer to grief than rage. Go ask that question, he said, to the traitor of the village. Hiruzen Sarutobi. Jiraiya's face darkened. What do you mean by that? Traitor of the village. Iso let out a short, bitter laugh, utterly without humor. You really don't know. His eyes burned. Or are you just pretending not to, Lord Jiraiya? He took one more step forward, close enough now that Jiraiya could see the raw resentment behind the Sharingan's glow. If you truly want answers, go ask the Senju clan. Go ask the Uzumaki clan. His voice cracked, just slightly, on the last word. They'll tell you exactly what kind of Hokage Hiruzen Sarutobi really is. Jiraiya remained silent. The conviction in Iso's voice wasn't fake. It wasn't political. It was personal. For the first time since returning to Konoha, a seed of doubt appeared in Jiraiya's heart. Without saying another word, whoosh, he vanished from the Uchiha district, leaving the four Uchiha standing silently beneath the lights. In the next instant, Jiraiya appeared outside the Hokage tower, the seed of doubt from the Uchiha district still sitting heavy in his chest. He didn't bother with the main entrance. Instead, he slipped through the open office window without a sound. Behind the broad wooden desk, buried beneath a mountain of paperwork, Hiruzen Sarutobi sat calmly reviewing documents by lamplight. The moment the old Hokage sensed the familiar chakra signature settle into the room, his brush stilled mid-stroke. He lifted his head, and a faint, tired smile crossed his weathered face. Jiraiya. His voice carried the warmth of a man greeting family. You're finally here. Jiraiya folded his arms and studied his old teacher without returning the smile. There was none of his usual grin, none of the easy charm he wore like a second skin. Tonight his face was set in something far more serious. What exactly is going on, old man? He said. I've been back in the village for a few hours, and already all I've heard are rumors. His eyes narrowed. Are they really trying to impeach you? Hiruzen leaned back slowly in his chair, the wood creaking beneath him, and let out a long, weary sigh. I believe so. He set down his brush. That certainly seems to be their intention. Jiraiya let out a short, humorless snort. Honestly, old man, looking at your age, you should have stepped down years ago. This village has leaned on you for far too long. Hiruzen only smiled, a bitter, knowing thing that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jiraiya's expression hardened further. I also heard the Uchiha clan intends to claim the Hokage's seat for themselves. He paused, letting the words settle, then pressed on before Hiruzen could respond. And one more thing. His voice dropped, quieter, sharper. Who exactly is Uchiha Akira? The room went still. Even the paperwork seemed to hold its breath. Hiruzen's eyes flickered. Just barely, just for a moment, before he answered with practiced calm. You don't need to worry about him anymore. Jiraiya's eyes narrowed instantly. What does that mean? His voice turned cold, each word deliberate. Was it really you? He took a step closer to the desk. Did you do something to him? He didn't wait for a denial. I just came from the Uchiha district, old man. They're furious. And the hatred I saw in their eyes, he shook his head slowly. That wasn't fake. That was something else entirely. Hiruzen cleared his throat, the sound awkward and a beat too late. Ahem. I don't know what you're talking about. Jiraiya said nothing. He simply stared. He'd known this man since he was a boy with a headband too big for his forehead, and in all those decades he'd learned exactly what Hiruzen's face looked like when he was dodging a question rather than answering one. This was that face. He opened his mouth to press further, but Hiruzen was already moving past it. Jiraiya. The old man's voice shifted, steering the conversation somewhere else entirely. You must become the next Hokage. Jiraiya's head snapped up, and he shook it immediately. Old man. How many times have I told you? I don't want that seat. Hiruzen's expression sobered, all traces of deflection gone now, replaced by something graver. There is no other choice. He met Jiraiya's eyes and held them. I cannot entrust this village to Danzo. I don't know what kind of catastrophe he would bring down on Konoha if given the chance. He let that sit for a moment before continuing. And more importantly, I cannot allow the Uchiha clan to take the Hokage's seat. Jiraiya listened in silence, arms still crossed, jaw tight. For decades, Hiruzen went on, we have kept the Uchiha under control. If they gain complete authority now, after everything between us, they won't simply seek equality. His voice lowered, heavy with something that sounded almost like regret. They'll seek retribution. And the cycle of resentment will only continue, generation after generation, until there's nothing left to salvage. Jiraiya frowned but said nothing, the weight of the words settling uncomfortably in his chest. Hiruzen rose from his chair and walked slowly to the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over the darkened rooftops of the village he'd spent his whole life protecting. Listen to me, Jiraiya. His voice was quieter now, almost pleading. Become Hokage. I'll remain at your side. I'll help you manage the administration myself. You'll only have one true responsibility. He turned back to face him. Maintain stability. Just until we can properly prepare the next Hokage. He held Jiraiya's gaze, unwavering. The village's economy is declining. The political situation grows more unstable by the week. This is the most critical period Konoha has faced since the Third Great Ninja War. He took a slow breath. There is no one more suited to steady this village than you. The Uchiha already carry tremendous political momentum. If you take the seat, we can restore the balance before all of it spirals beyond anyone's control. For a long moment, Jiraiya said nothing at all, the silence stretching taut between them. Then, finally, quietly, what about Tsunade? His voice had lost some of its edge. She'd make a far better Hokage than I ever could. Hiruzen shook his head slowly, and something like exhaustion passed over his features. We've already reached out to her. She refused the position without a moment's hesitation. He sighed. I don't believe she intends to return to the village. Not for this. Silence filled the office again, thicker this time. Then Hiruzen spoke once more, his tone softening into something almost coaxing. So, become Hokage. For now. He raised a hand before Jiraiya could object. When we find someone truly suited to the role, you can step down. It will only be temporary, I give you my word. Seeing the hesitation still lingering on Jiraiya's face, Hiruzen offered one last, carefully placed temptation. And you won't lose your freedom, either. You can still travel exactly as you always have. He allowed himself a small, knowing smile. As Hokage, you'll be permitted to appoint a second high command authority to oversee daily affairs whenever you're away. Jiraiya blinked, caught off guard. I can actually do that, of course. Hiruzen's smile widened slightly. You won't be chained to that desk forever. Jiraiya scratched the back of his head, some of the tension finally easing from his shoulders. Well, he exhaled. When you put it that way, he let out a long, resigned sigh. Fine, old man. What do I need to do first? Relief broke visibly across Hiruzen's face, the tension of the last few minutes melting away. Tomorrow morning, the Ninja Academy begins its new term. Students from across the village will be attending with their parents. He met Jiraiya's eyes. I want you there. Introduce yourself. Say a few words to encourage the children. A faint, knowing smile touched his lips. Let the villagers see with their own eyes that you've returned. News travels fast in this village, he added. Once people see that the legendary Sannin has come home, they'll start talking on their own. It will do wonders for public support behind your candidacy. Jiraiya sighed again, deeper this time. So we're already campaigning for me, then. Hiruzen chuckled softly, unbothered. I prefer to think of it as reassuring the villagers. Jiraiya rolled his eyes. You politicians really do have a different word for everything. He fell quiet for a moment, weighing it, before finally giving a short nod. All right. I'll show up at the academy tomorrow. His expression sharpened again as he added, but after that, old man, we're having another conversation. A real one. His eyes bored into Hiruzen's. There are too many things in this village that don't add up anymore. Hiruzen's smile faded by a fraction, something guarded settling behind his eyes. But he only nodded. Very well. Outside the office window, the lights of Konoha flickered on one by one across the darkening village, indifferent to the quiet weight of everything that had just been decided within those walls. The next morning, the normally peaceful streets of Konoha buzzed with a different kind of energy. Today marked the first day of the Ninja Academy's new term, and the whole village seemed to know it. Children from every corner of the Hidden Leaf, most no older than 6, walked proudly toward the academy grounds, their small faces caught somewhere between excitement and nerves. Their eyes shone with the kind of dreams only children carry without embarrassment. Dreams of headbands, of missions, of becoming the shinobi their parents told stories about at bedtime. For many of them, this single morning was the first real step toward carrying their clan's name forward. The academy grounds grew livelier with each passing minute as one prestigious family after another arrived. The black and green robes of the Nara clan appeared first. Young Shikamaru Nara shuffled along beside his father, Shikaku Nara, with all the enthusiasm of a boy being marched toward a chore. While the other children practically vibrated with anticipation, Shikamaru yawned so wide his eyes watered, muttering something about how troublesome the whole affair was before anyone had even said a word to him. Not far behind came the Akamichi clan. Choji Akamichi walked beside his father, Choza, one hand buried in a crinkling bag of potato chips, cheeks already full. His smile never wavered. Not once, not even between bites, and every few steps another handful disappeared into his mouth with the contentment of a boy who had already decided today was going to be a good day. Nearby walked Ino Yamanaka, dressed in the pale, elegant robes of her clan, one small hand wrapped snugly around her father's. She greeted every familiar face she passed with a bright, easy smile, clearly enjoying being seen. Soon after, the dignified Hyuga clan made their entrance. Hinata Hyuga walked quietly among them, her head lowered, small steps careful and measured. Around and behind her, Several Hyuga guards moved in perfect formation, their spotless white robes embroidered with the clan's crest, their expressions stern enough that the crowd instinctively parted to let them through without needing to be asked twice. Kiba Inuzuka arrived shortly after, though not with his parents. He came bounding in beside his older sister, Hana, a handful of spirited ninja dogs trotting at their heels, tails wagging, tongues out, already drawing a crowd of delighted children. Wow, look. Ninja dogs. So cool. Kiba grinned, chest puffed out with pride, as the puppies barked happily around his ankles. Then came Shino Aburame, expression unreadable as ever behind his round, dark sunglasses. He walked silently beside his uncle, dressed in the high-collared robes of the Aburame clan, a faint hum of insects occasionally drifting around him. A few nearby children took an unconscious step back. Scary. Don't get too close. The lively chatter of the courtyard rolled on, until, all at once, it didn't. Conversation faded in a slow wave, rippling outward from the entrance until the whole crowd had gone quiet. One by one, children and parents alike turned toward the gate. The Uchiha clan. They're here. Several students pointed without meaning to. At the front of the group walked Sasuke Uchiha. Only 6 years old, and yet he carried himself with a composure well beyond his age, dark eyes sweeping calmly over the courtyard as though he already understood exactly what kind of impression he was making. Behind him came his older brother, Itachi, and beside Itachi walked Shisui, the clan's celebrated genius, spoken of in hushed, admiring tones by shinobi twice his age. All three wore the Uchiha clan's formal attire, deep blue robes trimmed in rich crimson silk, the clan's red and white fan crest embroidered proudly across their backs. The effect was immediate and unmistakable. Heads turned, voices dropped, and for a moment the entire courtyard seemed to orbit around three boys walking calmly toward the stage. They really do look amazing. So that's the famous Uchiha clan. Several parents leaned down to murmur to their own children, voices low and pointed. If you get the chance, try to make friends with the young Uchiha. Good relations with that clan will serve you well for the rest of your life. Remember that. The children nodded obediently, though more than a few kept sneaking glances at Sasuke with open admiration they didn't quite know how to hide. Far from the gathering, at the edge of the crowd where the noise thinned out, another small figure made his way toward the academy at his own pace. Naruto Uzumaki. Unlike the other children in their pressed, elegant clan uniforms, Naruto wore his usual orange outfit, faded now, worn soft from countless washes, the color no longer quite as bright as it once must have been. He hadn't set foot inside the Uchiha compound since its grand opening months ago. Every time he'd tried, something had always gotten in the way. Sometimes it was Hiruzen himself, appearing as if from nowhere with an easy smile. Naruto. How about we go fishing today? Other times, an Ando operative would slip into the guise of a stooped old woman, leaning heavily on a cane. Oh dear, young man, could you help this old lady carry her groceries? And Naruto, unable to say no to anyone who asked for his help, always agreed, only to realize, once he'd finished, that he'd somehow ended up walking in the exact opposite direction from where he'd meant to go. Eventually, people simply told him, the Uchiha compound is closed. There's no reason for you to go there anymore. Naruto had felt the disappointment settle in his chest each time, quiet and small, but he never questioned it out loud. He simply accepted what he was told, the way he always did, and life folded back into its familiar shape. Expired milk. Instant ramen. Some nights, no dinner at all. The only bright spot was Ichiraku ramen. Whenever Chuki saw Naruto, he would occasionally give him an extra serving or quietly refuse to take his money. It was one of the few places where Naruto felt welcomed. As he neared the academy now, his steps slowed on their own. Ahead of him, the courtyard was full of small hands wrapped around larger ones. Fathers knelt to straighten collars. Mothers smoothed down messy hair one last time before letting go. Some parents held on a beat too long, as if reluctant to release their children even for the length of a school day. Naruto stood at the edge of it all and watched, his bright blue eyes drifting slowly from one family to the next. Then, without quite meaning to, he looked beside himself. No one there. No father's hand to hold. No mother fussing over his collar. Just his own shadow, stretched thin across the ground. His footsteps grew slower still. Why, he murmured, so quietly the word barely made it past his lips, why don't I have any parents? He lowered his head, staring at his sandals. Did they leave me? He whispered, because I'm not a good boy. No one answered. There was no one close enough to hear the question in the first place. A small, lonely smile touched his face, the kind of smile a child learns to make when there's no one around to comfort him, so he decides to comfort himself instead. He took one steadying breath, squared his shoulders, and walked into the academy alone. High above the academy grounds, hidden among the thick branches of an old tree, a masked Ando operative watched everything unfold in silence. Silver-white hair stirred faintly in the morning breeze. Kakashi. His single visible eye tracked Naruto's small orange figure from the moment the boy stepped through the gate, following him without pause until he melted into the crowd of new students. Only then did Kakashi allow himself to move. A blur, then another, reappearing an instant later in a different tree with a clearer view of the courtyard and every entrance leading into it. His mission hadn't changed since the day he'd been given it. Observe. Protect. Never be seen doing either. Inside the academy grounds, hundreds of new students had gathered before a large wooden stage bearing Konoha's leaf-shaped emblem. Parents lined up behind their children as academy staff moved through the crowd, gently coaxing everyone into orderly rows. Slowly, the excited chatter dimmed into an expectant hush. A familiar figure climbed the steps onto the stage. Iruka Yumino, still young himself, though he wore the instructor's uniform with visible pride, offered the crowd a warm, genuine smile. Welcome, everyone. His voice carried easily across the courtyard. Today marks the beginning of your journey as shinobi of the Hidden Leaf. I hope every one of you works hard, looks after your comrades, and grows into ninja this village can be proud of. The students clapped, several of them a little too enthusiastically for their parents' comfort. Iruka let the applause settle before continuing, his smile widening. And now, it is my great honor to introduce our third Hokage, Hokage-sama. The academy grounds erupted. Hokage-sama. Hokage-sama. Lord Third. Parents cheered. Children waved both arms over their heads. Every face in the courtyard turned toward the stage with the same open admiration. Near the back of the crowd, Naruto's eyes went wide and bright. So many people love the Hokage. A warm smile crept slowly across his face, chasing away some of the heaviness from moments before. I want to become Hokage too, he thought, chest swelling with the idea of it. I want everyone to cheer for me like that. Someday. At that moment, Hiruzen Sarutobi stepped onto the stage, and the cheering climbed even louder. He raised one hand, and the entire courtyard fell obediently silent, as if the gesture alone carried decades of authority behind it. He smiled, calm as ever, and began to speak. My fellow villagers, what is the will of fire? For the next 2 hours, Hiruzen spoke at length about it, about protecting one's comrades, about loving the village as one's own family, about the quiet, necessary sacrifices each generation made for the one that followed. Many of the parents listened with real reverence, nodding along at the familiar refrains. The children, however, had long since stopped listening. Small yawns spread through the crowd like a slow contagion. A few determined students fought valiantly to keep their eyes open, blinking hard against the pull of sleep. Even a handful of clan heads maintained carefully polite smiles while privately willing the speech toward its conclusion. Finally, near the end of it, Hiruzen's gaze drifted toward the side of the stage, and stopped. Beneath the shade of a large tree, someone was fast asleep, sitting upright with his head tipped back, a truly magnificent snot bubble inflating and deflating in perfect rhythm with his snoring. A vein twitched visibly on Hiruzen's forehead. He drew in a breath and let it out at full volume. Jiraiya. Pop. The bubble burst. The white-haired man shot upright like he'd been struck by lightning. Wah. Huh. What happened? Still blinking the sleep from his eyes, Jiraiya scratched furiously at his tangled white hair before slowly registering that every single pair of eyes in the courtyard had turned toward him. Hiruzen simply pointed at the stage. Come up here. Jiraiya let out a long, theatrical sigh before dragging himself upright and shuffling forward with all the enthusiasm of a man walking toward his own execution. The moment the crowd recognized him, the courtyard exploded into a fresh wave of noise. Lord Jiraiya. It's one of the legendary Sannin. Lord Jiraiya. Villagers clapped eagerly. Children stared up at him with wide, star-struck eyes. Among the crowd, the clan heads exchanged quiet, knowing glances. Shikaku Nara's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. Choza Akamichi folded his arms, expression thoughtful. Inoichi Yamanaka went uncharacteristically still, clearly turning something over in his mind. Shisui Uchiha simply watched, silent as always, giving nothing away. None of them were fools. They understood exactly what this was. Hiruzen hadn't called Jiraiya up to introduce him. He'd called him up to send a message. A quiet, deliberate warning aimed at every clan gathered in that courtyard. The third Hokage still held his greatest card close. One of the legendary Sannin remained loyal to him. Whatever came next, that fact wasn't going to change quietly. Jiraiya exchanged a few lazy, half-hearted words with the crowd before waving them off and stepping back from the stage, clearly eager to return to whatever nap he'd been so rudely interrupted from. Not long after, the academy's opening ceremony drew to a close. Parents began saying their goodbyes throughout the courtyard, some pulling their children into tight, lingering hugs, others crouching down to offer one last piece of advice before letting go. Small hands waved until the distance swallowed them completely. One by one, the adults filtered out through the gates, leaving behind them the next generation of Konoha's shinobi to begin the very first chapter of their journey. Far away from the bustling ninja academy, past the reach of sunlight and the sound of children's laughter, a cold, silent cave sat hidden deep beneath the earth. Down here, nothing had changed. Nothing ever did. Uchiha Akira remained exactly as he always was, seated upon the rough stone platform, legs folded in quiet meditation, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. Since the day of his imprisonment, he had done almost nothing at all. No training. No probing of the walls for weaknesses. No desperate attempts to escape. He simply sat, still and patient, as though time itself were an opponent he intended to outlast through sheer stillness. The cave held its silence like a held breath. Then the air rippled. Space folded in on itself, twisting into a slow, spiraling vortex, and a masked figure stepped through it into the dim light of the cavern. Uchiha Obito. He looked at the seated man and let out a low chuckle. It seems your prediction was correct. Akira opened his eyes slowly, unhurried, as if he'd merely been resting them rather than sleeping. From what I observed today, Obito continued, Jiraiya will most likely become Konoha's next Hokage. Akira regarded him for a moment. Not a flicker of surprise crossed his face. Naturally. His voice was even, almost bored. Hiruzen has no other choice left to him. Tsunade abandoned this village years ago, and Orochimaru has grown far too difficult to control. He tilted his head slightly. Of the candidates remaining, Jiraiya is the only reasonable successor. Behind the mask, Obito's single visible eye narrowed. Even after days locked away in this cave with no access to the outside world, Akira's read on Konoha's political machinery was unsettlingly precise, as if imprisonment had done nothing to dull the mind behind it. A silence stretched between them before Akira finally spoke again. Why are you keeping me alive? His tone carried no fear, only genuine curiosity. If you meant to kill me, you would have done it already. Obito laughed softly, the sound muffled behind the mask. Not now, Uchiha Akira. Not now. He took a few slow steps closer, his presence filling the small space between them. I've seen everything you accomplished inside the Uchiha district. The way you reshaped that clan from the inside out. The way you planted ideas into people's heads without a single one of them noticing it wasn't their own thought to begin with. He shook his head, something almost like admiration in the gesture. That mind of yours really is something else. He paused. I also know you've quietly built yourself quite a fortune over the years. His voice dropped lower, more deliberate now. So, I have a proposal for you. Join the Akatsuki. The words settled into the cave like stones dropped into still water. Whatever it is your heart truly longs for, Obito went on. Peace, revenge, the return of someone you've lost, or simply power, absolute and unchallenged. I can give it to you. Not as some fleeting victory that slips away the moment you look elsewhere. He spread his hands slightly, but as an eternal, unshakable reality. In the world I intend to build, no one loses. No one suffers. No one cries. His voice lowered further, almost reverent. Your dream wouldn't just come true. It would last forever. The cave fell silent again, heavier this time. Akira studied him, his gaze steady and unreadable, meeting the single eye visible through the mask. And what, exactly, would I have to do to join you? Obito answered without a moment's hesitation. Prove your loyalty. Akira's expression didn't shift. And how would I prove that? A cold smile curved beneath the mask. Help us eliminate the entire Uchiha clan. For the first time since Obito had arrived, something changed in Akira's face. The temperature in the cave seemed to drop several degrees in an instant. His eyes turned frighteningly cold, and a wave of killing intent rolled off him so suddenly and so completely that it pressed against the stone walls like a physical weight. And then, just as abruptly, it was gone. Akira closed his eyes, drew one slow, deliberate breath. When he opened them again, his face had settled back into perfect calm, as though the moment before had never happened at all. Why? He asked quietly. Obito tilted his masked head. Why what? Why do you want to kill the Uchiha? Obito answered plainly, without any attempt to soften it. Konoha's upper echelon has already decided their fate. The clan is planning a coup, and the village's leadership wants the Uchiha exterminated before it can happen. He shrugged slightly. With our assistance, the operation would be quicker, cleaner, far more efficient than whatever the village would manage on its own. He spread his hands. My own objective in all of this is simple. I want Konoha weakened. Akira leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, studying him with something that looked almost like mild disappointment. If weakening Konoha is truly your goal, he said, then why waste the effort on the Uchiha at all? I already hold influence within that clan. I can steer its direction from the inside without a single drop of blood being spilled by your hand. He paused, letting the thought land. If crippling the village is really what you want, why not aim instead at the people who actually hold power? The Sarutobi. The Shimura. The elders who have spent decades pulling every string in this village. His lips curved into a faint, unsettling smile. Or any of the other great clans, for that matter. If you'd like, he added, almost pleasantly, I could even help you destroy them. Obito went rigid. For several long seconds, he simply stared at the man seated before him, saying nothing. Then, disbelief crept into his voice. You would kill your own villagers. Akira's smile remained perfectly calm. Aren't you proposing exactly the same thing? He tilted his head. You just told me Konoha's own leadership intends to wipe out the Uchiha to protect itself. If they're willing to betray their own people for the sake of political convenience, then why should anyone else be held to a different standard? The cave went quiet once more, and this time Obito was the one who fell silent, his head bowing slightly as he turned the idea over. It was, he had to admit, a surprisingly reasonable proposal. If the Uchiha were left alive, and set instead against the Sarutobi, the Shimura, and the rest of Konoha's ruling clans, the resulting conflict wouldn't be a clean, one-sided massacre swept quietly under the rug. It would be a war, a civil war, fought from within, where the village's great clans bled alongside the Uchiha rather than simply erasing them. Konoha's military strength would be gutted regardless of who came out on top. The hidden leaf would emerge from it crippled either way, and from where Obito stood, that outcome served his purposes far better than a tidy massacre ever could. He slowly crossed his arms. Interesting. He said it almost to himself. Very interesting. I hadn't considered that angle. He looked back down at Akira, still seated calmly on the stone platform as though none of what had just passed between them carried any weight at all. I'll think about it, Obito said at last. When the right moment comes, I'll return. He didn't wait for a response. The space around him twisted once more, the familiar spiral vortex opening and swallowing him whole in an instant. A heartbeat later, the cave settled back into its complete, undisturbed silence. Only Uchiha Akira remained, still seated on the cold stone, his expression giving nothing away. Whether he had just planted the seed of a chaos far greater than anything Obito intended, or simply bought himself a little more time to wait, only Akira knew for certain. 2 more days passed in Konoha, and still there was no word of Uchiha Akira. While the clan searched in vain, the Hokage faction had begun moving in full force, openly promoting Jiraiya as the next in line for the seat. Banners went up, whispers turned to open endorsements. The village's political current was shifting, and everyone could feel it. Within the Uchiha clan, however, the mood remained grim, and grew grimmer by the hour. Inside the Uchiha council hall, a heavy silence pressed down over the enormous chamber. 12 clan elders sat in a row at the front of the room, Fugaku occupying the central seat with the stillness of a man carrying more weight than his posture led on. Behind them stood nearly 30 elite Uchiha Jonin, their faces drawn tight with worry and barely restrained frustration. No one spoke. The silence had teeth. Finally, Fugaku broke it. Has anyone learned anything about Akira? The question alone was enough to darken every face in the room. One of the elders shook his head slowly, as if the motion itself cost him something. We've mobilized every resource our clan possesses, he said. Our scouts have combed every route out of the village. We've questioned every contact, chased down every lead we could find. He lowered his head. And we've found nothing. Not a single clue. The words landed like a hammer against stone. Fugaku's hand tightened around the armrest of his chair until his knuckles paled. After a long, taut pause, he spoke again. The village council has finalized the date. His voice was flat, controlled. It will be held the day after tomorrow. That announcement only deepened the gloom already hanging over the room. Without Akira, none of them were certain how they were even supposed to proceed. It was Hawk Elder who finally rose from his seat. Since Akira's disappearance he had said almost nothing, sitting through every meeting in uncharacteristic silence, but now his eyes carried the weight of a decision already made. I propose we continue according to Elder Akira's original plan. Every head in the chamber turned toward him. I nominate Lord Fugaku to become the next Hokage. For a moment, no one breathed. I believe Elder Akira would never want everything he fought for to go to waste, Hawk Elder continued, his voice steady. Among every member of this clan, Lord Fugaku is the most qualified to carry it forward. He holds both the strength and the reputation the position demands. In terms of standing, only Jiraiya comes close to rivaling him. He looked slowly around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each elder in turn. Those in favor, raise your hands. One by one, hands lifted into the air. 10 of the 12 elders voted in support. Hawk Elder nodded once, satisfied. The majority has spoken. The motion passes. From this moment forward, the Uchiha clan officially backs Uchiha Fugaku as our candidate for the position of 5th Hokage. The chamber stirred, elders and Jonin alike beginning to shift toward the next order of business. Bang! The council doors slammed open. A young genin stumbled inside, chest heaving, clearly having run the entire way. Clan head. Clan head. Fugaku's brow furrowed. What happened? The genin staggered forward, struggling to catch enough breath to speak. Clan head. Someone has placed bounties on the entire upper echelon of Konoha. Fugaku's expression didn't change. And, what's unusual about that? Every few days someone or another places a bounty on Konoha's leadership. It's practically background noise at this point. This time is different, the genin said, swallowing hard. The amount, it's nothing like anything we've seen before. That, finally, caught Fugaku's full attention. What do you mean? The genin hurried forward and pressed several scrolls into his hands. Please, look for yourself. Fugaku unrolled the first scroll. The moment his eyes landed on its contents, his pupils contracted sharply. At the center of the parchment was a large, unmistakable portrait. Wanted. Sarutobi Hiruzen. Dead only. Reward. 50 billion ryo. Beneath the portrait ran a profile so exhaustive it read less like a bounty notice and more like a completed intelligence file, years in the making. Character profile. Name. Sarutobi Hiruzen, 3rd Hokage. Affiliation. Konohagakure, Hidden Leaf Village. Ninja rank. Cage. Nature transformations. Fire, earth, water, wind, lightning, yin, yang, master of all 5 basic elements. Official databook stats. Ninjutsu. 5/5. Taijutsu. 5/5. Genjutsu. 4/5. Intelligence. 5/5. Strength. 3/5 lower due to advanced age. Speed. 3/5 lower due to advanced age. Stamina. 3/5 lower due to advanced age. Hand seals. 5/5. Total score. 34/40. Signature powers and abilities. Universal element mastery. The rare ability to use and combine all 5 basic nature transformations simultaneously. Monkey King Enma Summoning. Summons the powerful Monkey King, capable of transforming into the indestructible adamantine staff. Advanced Shurikenjutsu. Mastery of weapon manipulation, capable of creating thousands of physical shadow copies of a single thrown weapon. Unmatched jutsu knowledge. Famously reputed to know and command mastery over every jutsu ever developed within Konoha. Ultimate attacks and jutsu list. Sealing jutsu, Fuinjutsu. Dead demon consuming seal, Shiki Fujin, a forbidden sacrificial technique that summons the Shinigami itself to permanently extract and seal an opponent's soul, at the cost of the user's own life. Earth style, Doden. Earth style wall. Earth style, Mudspit. Fire style, Kaden. Fire style, Fire Dragon Flame Missile. Combined nature jutsu. 5 elements great combo jutsu. General ninjutsu. Tile shuriken conjuring. Shadow clone jutsu. Shuriken shadow clone. Weaknesses. Advanced age. Limited stamina. Reduced chakra reserves. Lower physical durability. Emotional attachment toward the 3 Sanin. Fugaku stared at the scroll, disbelief etched into every line of his face. What? His voice was barely audible. How could anyone gather information this detailed? This isn't a bounty listing. It's a complete dossier on Lord Third himself. Without a word, he passed the scroll to the elder beside him. It moved down the line from hand to hand, and with each reading, expressions shifted. First confusion, then something closer to genuine shock. This is, one elder murmured. Isn't this far too detailed to have been thrown together? It's as if someone spent years studying every last detail of Lord Third, another added, voice tight. Fugaku, meanwhile, had already unrolled the second scroll. The instant his eyes found the reward listed at the top, his breath caught in his throat. Shimura Danzo. Dead only. Reward. 100 billion ryo. His eyes widened. Beneath the bounty sat another complete profile, every bit as thorough as the first. Character profile. Name. Shimura Danzo. Affiliation. Konohagakure Root Anbu. Ninja rank. Cage level. Nature transformations. Wind, earth, water, fire, yin, yang. Official databook stats. Ninjutsu. 4.55. Taijutsu. 4.55. Genjutsu. 5/5. Intelligence. 4.55. Strength. 3.55. Speed. 3/5. Stamina. 3/5. Hand seals. 4/5. Total score. 32/40. The right arm. Danzo's right arm was surgically engineered by Orochimaru, built from a stolen shinobi limb embedded with 10 Sharingan eyes harvested from members of the Uchiha clan. The ultimate cheat code, Izanagi. When activated, any fatal wound or death Danzo suffers is rewritten as nothing more than an illusion. Each embedded Sharingan grants exactly 60 seconds of Izanagi. With 10 eyes at his disposal, he possesses nearly 10 minutes of practical immortality. Once an eye's allotted time runs out, it goes permanently blind. Hashirama cell integration. To stabilize the arm, Danzo had Hashirama Senju cells grafted directly onto his body. The cells dramatically increase his chakra reserves and grant him limited access to wood-style techniques. However, should his chakra ever become fully exhausted, the Hashirama cells will begin to mutate uncontrolled, consuming his body and transforming him into an unstable, uncontrollable mass of living wood. Signature techniques. Wind style. Vacuum wave. Wind style. Vacuum serial waves. Wind style. Vacuum blade. Summoning. Baku, Nightmare Eater. Reverse 4 symbols sealing. The instant the last elder finished reading, the room erupted. What? He implanted Sharingan into his own arm. Those are our clansman's eyes. So this, one Jonin's voice cracked with fury. This is why he wanted the Uchiha clan exterminated. To get Sharingan eyes. Killing intent surged through the council hall like a rising tide. Sharingan bloomed to life across dozens of pairs of eyes, activated on instinct before their owners had even fully processed what they'd just read. Fugaku said nothing. His expression had gone colder than anyone in the room had seen it in years. Silently, he turned to the remaining scrolls. The final two belonged to Homura Mitokado and Kaharu Udatane. 10 billion ryo apiece, dead only, no further conditions attached. He passed the last of the scrolls down the line without comment. Once every elder had read through the full set, one of them finally muttered what half the room was already thinking. Whoever released these, they don't just want Konoha's leadership dead. He shook his head slowly. They hate them. Truly hate them. A short distance away, Shisui and Itachi exchanged a look, one that held no words, only a shared, creeping horror. Neither spoke for several long seconds. Finally, Itachi broke the silence, his voice quieter than usual. Shisui, isn't today the 7th day since Elder Akira disappeared? Shisui nodded slowly. A bitter, humorless smile touched his lips. I'm afraid, he said, this might be his doing. Fugaku's head turned toward him sharply. You know something. Shisui hesitated. For one brief moment, he considered staying silent, letting the thought die where it stood. But he let out a long breath instead and gave in. Clan head, he said quietly. I think I know who placed these bounties. Fugaku's eyes narrowed to slits. Who? Elder Akira. The room went utterly still. Before all of this, Shisui continued, he once told Itachi and me that he'd prepared a dead man's switch. If he were ever killed, these files would be released automatically, scattered across the underground bounty market for anyone with the coin to see. He swallowed. He said that even if he died, he'd make certain everyone responsible for persecuting the Uchiha clan paid for it. The council hall fell into a silence unlike any that had come before it. Several Uchiha Jonin lowered their heads. A few of the elders clenched their fists hard enough to whiten their knuckles. A slow wave of emotion moved through the room, passing from face to face like something contagious. So even after his death, someone murmured, voice thick, Elder Akira was still thinking of revenge for this clan. A few of the older Jonin closed their eyes, unable to hold back what the moment stirred in them. The sacrifice. The years of quiet preparation. Even in death, the man had refused to stop protecting the people he'd spent his life shaping. But Fugaku's face only grew darker. He didn't want to hear those words. Dead. No. He refused to believe it. Akira was still alive. He had to be. Until he saw the body with his own eyes, Fugaku would never accept anything else. While the Uchiha clan was still reeling from the revelation, the shockwave had already spread far beyond Konoha's walls. The entire ninja world erupted into chaos. The underground bounty market, usually a quiet current running beneath the surface of the shinobi world, had gone completely insane overnight. 170 billion ryo. Never in recorded history had a single bounty, let alone a combined one, spread across 4 names, reached a number so absurd it barely felt real. Every hidden village, every mercenary band, every missing nin scraping by on scraps of old glory, every bounty hunter with a blade and a grudge, was staring at the exact same posters, doing the exact same math, and arriving at the exact same conclusion. The world had just been handed a fortune, and all it would cost was the blood of Konoha's leadership. Kumogaku, Reikage's office. The 4th Reikage's laughter rolled through the office like thunder. Ha 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 ha. His fist came down on the desk hard enough to rattle the ink pots. Who in the hell did that old bastard Hiruzen offend this time? He wiped at his eyes, still laughing. He's completely screwed. 50 billion ryo, just for him. His advisors traded glances of their own, caught somewhere between amusement and genuine unease. A bounty of that size on a sitting cage. Even seasoned shinobi who thought they had seen everything found it difficult to stay composed. The Reikage finally caught his breath, grinning ear to ear. Oh, this is going to be entertaining. Iwagakure, Tsuchikage's office. Onoki hovered a few inches above his chair, arms folded, a satisfied smirk spreading slowly across his weathered face. So, he murmured to no one in particular, Konoha has finally gone and made itself a truly terrifying enemy. He read back through the intelligence a second time, then a third, lingering over every line. Every weakness laid bare. Every technique catalogued in exhaustive detail. Even secrets Konoha had clearly never intended to see daylight. Someone, somewhere, had handed the entire ninja world a blueprint of Konoha's upper leadership, gift-wrapped and ready for use. For Onoki, it was nothing short of wonderful news. The stronger Konoha's enemies become, he thought, allowing himself a rare moment of satisfaction, the safer Iwagakure becomes by comparison. Sunagakure, Council Chamber. Unlike the amused reactions rippling through Kumo and Iwa, Sunagakure treated the matter with total, unflinching seriousness. The entire High Council had convened. Maps covered the long conference table. Infiltration routes, assassination corridors, contingency escapes, ranked lists of priority targets. No one in the room was laughing. One of the elders spoke first, voice measured. Our annual village budget sits at roughly 5 billion ryo. Heads nodded around the table. The number wasn't news to anyone present. Another elder gestured toward the bounty posters spread across the map. The total reward on offer this time, he said, is 170 billion. The room went quiet. Someone did the arithmetic out loud, almost involuntarily. 32 years. That single figure represented more than 3 decades of Sunagakure's entire annual operating budget, condensed into one payout. A single successful strike could reshape the village's future, could lift Sunagakure clean out of the poverty that had strangled it for years. The Case looked around the table, letting the silence stretch just long enough. What do you propose? One of the elders answered without hesitation, as if the plan had already been drafted the moment the posters arrived. We deploy suicide assassination squads. Several heads nodded in immediate agreement. They won't be walking out of Konoha alive after killing targets that high profile, the elder continued. So we don't waste resources planning an extraction that was never going to happen anyway. Their mission is simple. Kill the targets. That's all. He spread his hands slightly. If even one of them succeeds, the reward alone secures this village's future for a generation. No one raised an objection. The council approved the plan unanimously, without a single dissenting voice. Across the wider ninja world, the pattern repeated itself with only minor variations. Every major village, every hidden settlement tucked into some forgotten corner of the map, every criminal syndicate and lone bounty hunter with a blade to sell, all of them had been seized by the same impossible temptation. The world, in the span of a single day, had gone quietly mad. A small gambling house. Tsunade lowered the bounty poster slowly, her hands trembling, not from the size of the reward, though it was staggering even by her standards, but from something buried further down the page, something that had nothing to do with money at all. Her eyes stayed locked on a single line. Hashirama cell integration. Her expression darkened instantly, all traces of her earlier boredom gone. Damn you, she said quietly, the words scraping out through clenched teeth. Danzo. Her grip tightened around the edge of the poster until the paper crumpled beneath her fingers. You couldn't even let the dead rest in peace. Her voice shook, fury bleeding into every syllable. How dare you carve up grandfather's cells for something this vile? Her golden eyes burned with something far more dangerous than anger. Shizune. The young woman beside her straightened instantly. Yes, Lady Tsunade. We're going back to the village. Shizune blinked, caught off guard. So soon. Tsunade was already rising from her seat, the crushed poster still clutched in one fist. I'm going to kill that old bastard myself. She turned and walked toward the door without waiting for a response. Yes, Lady Tsunade. Shizune scrambled after her, gathering their things in a rush. Akatsuki headquarters. Deep within the hidden underground base, a high-level meeting was already underway. Pain sat at the head of the chamber. Konan stood near him. Around the stone table, Obito, Kakuzu, Sasori, and Orochimaru occupied their places, the dim light casting long shadows across a room heavy with unspoken calculation. Konan stepped forward and set a stack of bounty posters down on the table between them. This is the latest bounty issued against Konoha's upper echelon. Everyone leaned in, sifting through the documents in silence. Konoha's leadership has grown weak, Konan said once the room had finished reading. But the rewards attached to that weakness are extraordinarily generous. Her gaze swept the table. Our organization needs funding on a scale most villages can't imagine, if we intend to see true peace realized. We cannot let an opportunity like this simply pass us by. Her eyes settled on Orochimaru. Orochimaru. You'll lead this mission. No one at this table knows Konoha the way you do. A faint, satisfied smile crossed Orochimaru's face. If that's the case, he said, I'll want an increase to my research budget in exchange. Konan glanced toward Pain. He said nothing, only inclined his head slightly, a single, wordless nod. Konan turned back to Orochimaru. Agreed. Satisfied, Orochimaru leaned back into his chair, hands folded, clearly already imagining what he'd do with the extra funding. At that moment, Obito rose slowly from his seat. There's something the rest of you should know. Every eye in the room turned toward him. Hiruzen is expected to be impeached tomorrow. A ripple of mild surprise passed through the chamber. I'd originally assumed Danzo had the strongest chance of taking the Hokage seat once Hiruzen was gone. He picked up Danzo's bounty poster, turning it over once in his hand before setting it back down. But now that these files are public, he shook his head slowly. He may not survive long enough to ever sit behind that desk. He let the poster settle back onto the table. After him, Jiraiya is the most likely candidate left standing. At the mention of Jiraiya's name, Orochimaru's faint smile vanished entirely. His eyes narrowed by the smallest fraction, barely noticeable, but Conan caught it all the same. Pain finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight that ended most conversations in that room before they could continue. It seems Konoha is about to experience the greatest political unrest in its history. He turned toward Obito. Contact the Uchiha clan. We'll offer our support. We need someone positioned on the inside, he continued. Let the Uchiha deal with Danzo themselves. They have every reason to want him dead already. We'll handle Hiruzen. He paused. And the other two elders alongside him. Pain rose slowly from his seat. Move. Without another word, every figure in the room, each wrapped in the same black cloak marked with red clouds, stood in near perfect unison. The air around them rippled and folded, space distorting at the edges of the chamber, and one after another they vanished into the dark. Only Pain and Conan remained. The underground chamber settled back into silence, the weight of everything just said in motion hanging quietly in the empty air. Konoha. Hokage's office. Inside the Hokage's office, Hiruzen Sarutobi sat in silence, staring down at the bounty poster spread across his desk. His face had settled into a grimness that rarely showed itself these days. For the first time in longer than he could easily remember, he felt something close to genuine fear. How? He murmured, almost to himself. How does anyone know this much about me? His eyes moved slowly across the profile a second time, then a third. Some of the details recorded there were so precise, so thorough, that he found himself struggling to recall certain fragments of his own past. Pieces of his life someone else had apparently catalogued more carefully than he had. I'd forgotten some of this myself, he muttered, fingers tightening around the edge of the scroll until the parchment creased beneath his grip. He set it aside and reached for the second poster. Shimura Danzo. Dead only. 100 billion ryo. Hiruzen's brow furrowed. Why is his bounty higher than mine? The question came out half to himself, half to the empty room. Is he truly considered more dangerous than I am? Curiosity pulled him further down the page, until his eyes reached the section describing Danzo's right arm, and his expression shifted entirely. Hashirama's cells. His voice had gone flat with disbelief. 10 Sharingan. His eyes widened as the full weight of it settled in. That bastard. He brought the scroll down against the desk hard enough to rattle the inkwell. The Uchiha will never let him live after this comes to light. Across the room, Jiraiya had already finished his own copy of Danzo's profile. Whatever remained of his usual easy demeanor had vanished completely, his expression darkened by what he'd just read. The stolen Sharingan, the grafted cells. He looked up slowly. Old man. His voice was quiet, careful. Did you know about this? Hiruzen's head shook immediately, firmly. Of course not. Jiraiya said nothing for several long moments. Finally, he exhaled. Things have taken the worst possible turn. At that moment, a knock sounded, sharp and precise, and an Anbu shinobi appeared before the desk, dropping to one knee. Hokage-sama. We've completed the investigation. We've identified the individual who issued the bounty. Hiruzen's head snapped up. Who? The Anbu answered without a flicker of hesitation. Uchiha Akira. What? Hiruzen was on his feet before he'd even finished the word. How is that possible? Even Jiraiya's brow creased. The name alone seemed to thicken the air in the room, pressing down on everyone present. Hiruzen shook his head, rejecting the answer outright. He was already dealt with weeks ago. The Anbu lowered his head slightly. Hokage-sama. I believe that is precisely the reason. Both men turned toward him sharply. The Anbu continued, his tone even. Our investigation indicates the bounty was originally established nearly 2 years ago. It was never meant to release immediately. It was built with a failsafe, a mechanism requiring its creator to manually halt it, every single week, without fail. If that cancellation never came, he paused. It would trigger automatically, publishing itself throughout the underground bounty market on its own. The office fell into stunned silence. For reasons we don't yet know, the Anbu finished. Uchiha Akira never returned to stop it. Hiruzen sank slowly back into his chair, his expression growing uglier by the second as the full shape of what had happened settled into place. He had done this to himself. The very operation meant to remove Akira from the equation entirely had, instead, triggered the single greatest bounty in the history of the shinobi world. There's one more matter, Hokage-sama, the Anbu said. Hiruzen looked up again, wary now of whatever came next. When Uchiha Akira first created the bounty, the total reward attached to it was only 20 billion ryo. Both Hiruzen and Jiraiya frowned at the number. But, the Anbu continued, swallowing before he finished, it has since grown to 170 billion. Our analysts believe he spent the last 2 years quietly funneling his entire personal fortune into it, piece by piece, without ever letting the increase show. The room went silent again, heavier this time. Jiraiya closed his eyes slowly. So this Akira really is something else entirely. When he opened them again, there was a weight behind his gaze that hadn't been there before. He thought back to the great Toad Sage's words, a man capable of shaking the world to its foundations, of dragging the shinobi world into chaos it might never fully recover from. It seems Lord Gamamaru wasn't exaggerating after all. This man really is capable of unraveling everything. After a long pause, he turned toward Hiruzen. What do we do now, old man? Tomorrow the council votes on your impeachment. Hiruzen let out a short, dismissive snort. What is there to worry about? He waved a hand, as if brushing the whole matter aside. These bounties weren't placed without cause. I've done nothing to wrong this village. He lifted Danzo's poster again, holding it out almost as evidence. It was Danzo who committed these disgusting acts. We'll see him properly punished at tomorrow's meeting. Then he turned toward the still kneeling Anbu. Go. Inform Danzo. His voice was calm, measured, almost gentle. Tell him to prepare himself for tomorrow's council. Yes, Hokage-sama. The Anbu vanished. Jiraiya watched the whole exchange without a word, though inwardly he couldn't hold back a bitter thought. What a shameless old man. He kept his face carefully neutral. You're warning him to run, and dressing it up as procedure. If Danzo slipped away before morning, no one would ever be able to prove Hiruzen had lifted a finger to help him. Jiraiya understood exactly what game was being played here, understood it completely. But he said nothing. The village was already balanced on the edge of chaos. He had no intention of being the one who tipped it over further. Then, without warning, bang, the office doors swung open. Hiruzen's eyes moved to the entrance. Uchiha Fugaku stepped through with calm, unhurried strides, crossed the room, and set an official document down on the desk without a single wasted word. Lord Hokage. His voice was level, controlled. You've seen the bounty posters by now. We have reason to suspect Shimura Danzo is engaged in acts that directly threaten this village's security. I'm requesting your authorization to arrest him and open a formal investigation. Hiruzen folded his hands calmly atop the desk. Fugaku. I've already dispatched Anbu to look into the matter. The Uchiha clan will receive a fair answer in time. Fugaku shook his head immediately. No. His tone hardened. Lord Hiruzen, your secret service failed to notice a man desecrating the dead for years, right under this village's nose. If they couldn't uncover something of that magnitude, what exactly do you expect them to uncover now? His gaze sharpened further. We also suspect, he said, that you yourself may be an accomplice. The office went utterly silent. Jiraiya's eyes widened slightly at the accusation, but he held his tongue. Fugaku pressed on without a trace of hesitation. So we cannot simply trust your investigation to be impartial. He nodded toward the document on the desk. If you've truly done nothing wrong, then sign this. We'll investigate the matter ourselves. His eyes didn't waver. This concerns village security. And under Konoha law, matters of village security fall under the jurisdiction of the military police force. Hiruzen studied him in silence for a long moment before finally speaking. You've changed a great deal, Fugaku. A faint, humorless smile touched Fugaku's face. Of course I have. His voice was quiet, almost tired. I had to learn exactly how dirty this village's politics really are, so that nothing like this ever happens to my clan again. Hiruzen's expression darkened further. Fugaku slid the document another inch closer across the desk. Lord Hokage, please sign. His voice cooled by another degree. Otherwise, we'll be forced to handle this ourselves. Hiruzen shook his head slowly. I won't sign it. This matter concerns the first Hokage's legacy directly. As Hokage, uncovering the truth of it is my responsibility, and mine alone. You'll wait for the results of my investigation, same as anyone else. Fugaku looked at him for several long seconds, saying nothing. Then, quietly, he spoke his final words. You truly are the cancer of this village, Hiruzen Sarutobi. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked out, footsteps unhurried, and the heavy doors swung shut behind him with a weight that seemed to press against the silence he left in his wake. Back at his seat Hiruzen face darkened. Root headquarters. Deep beneath Konoha, the underground headquarters of Root sat completely abandoned. The corridors stretched out empty, footsteps of 100 silent operatives now nothing but memory. Every classified document had been stripped from its shelves. Every experimental record, every ledger, every scrap of research accumulated over decades. Gone, carried off before anyone else could lay eyes on it. What remained was burning. Flames crept slowly through the underground facility, licking up the last abandoned furniture, consuming whatever traces of Root's existence hadn't been worth the effort to carry out. Danzo's secret headquarters, once one of the most closely guarded places in the entire village, had been reduced to nothing more than an empty, smoldering shell. He was already gone. Konoha Council Hall. The following morning, every major clan of Konohagakure filed into the council chamber. This was no ordinary session, and everyone present knew it. Today would decide the fate of the third Hokage. An enormous oval table dominated the center of the hall, its surface polished smooth by decades of use. Only clan heads were permitted to sit at it. Behind each leader stood at least 2 trusted representatives, arms folded, faces carefully composed. The tension in the room was thick enough that even breathing felt like an effort. On one side of the table sat the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi. Directly across from him sat Uchiha Fugaku, with Shisui, Itachi, Hawk Elder, and the remaining Uchiha elders standing silently at his back. Around the rest of the table sat the heads of the Nara, Yamanaka, Akamichi, Hyuga, Aburame, Inazuka, and a dozen smaller clans besides. Even the civilian council members, usually eager to fill any silence with opinion, sat unnervingly still. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Finally, Fugaku rose slowly from his seat, his eyes fixed on Hiruzen without blinking. Hiruzen Sarutobi. His voice carried easily across the silent chamber. For decades, we respected you. We trusted you. We believed every decision you made was for the good of this village. He paused, letting the weight of what came next settle in advance. But your greed has blinded you. The room went utterly still. Hiruzen's brow furrowed. What exactly are you implying, Fugaku? I'm not implying anything. Fugaku's voice remained level, unhurried. I'm stating facts. He drew out a thick stack of documents and set them on the table with a deliberate thud. Throughout your tenure, you have allowed this village to rot from within. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed. Choose your words carefully. No. Fugaku met his gaze without flinching. It's long past time for careful words. It's time, finally, for the truth. He laid the documents flat. Hiruzen Sarutobi. You have caused this village far more damage than anyone here has been willing to say aloud. Hiruzen's expression stiffened by degrees as Fugaku continued, unrelenting. During your tenure, this village suffered large-scale embezzlement of its funds, and you never uncovered who was responsible. Several clan heads nodded silently, expressions grim. During your tenure, countless children vanished without explanation, and no investigation into their disappearances was ever properly completed. Hiruzen's brows drew tighter. During your tenure, illegal experimentation using the first Hokage's cells was allowed to continue, unchecked, for years. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. During your tenure, the Uzumaki clan was destroyed outright, and you failed to preserve what should have been Konoha's greatest ally. Hiruzen's gaze dropped, if only slightly. During your tenure, the once great Senju clan quietly dwindled to almost nothing. The very clan that founded this village has nearly vanished from its own history. A few of the older clan heads let out audible sighs. During your tenure, an organization calling itself Root was allowed to grow beneath everyone's feet, unseen. It kidnapped shinobi. It stole away talented children before their families ever knew they were gone. It has left scars on nearly every clan gathered in this room tonight. Fists clenched around the table, quiet and involuntary. Even those who had once counted themselves among Hiruzen's supporters said nothing now. Fugaku pressed on. During your tenure, the Sarutobi clan, the Shimura clan, and the clans of Homura Mitokado and Kaharu Uchiha expanded to nearly 40,000 members combined. He looked around the room. The total population of Konoha is only 120,000. One-third of the entire village now belongs to only 4 political families. No balance of power remains. No village can remain healthy under such concentration of influence. Uneasy glances passed between several clan leaders. No one could argue with the arithmetic. During your tenure, Fugaku went on, voice hardening further, we lost countless young shinobi in the Third Shinobi War to operations that were poorly planned from the start, children sent onto battlefields long before they were ready for them. The weight in the room grew heavier still. During your tenure, the achievements of other clans were quietly suppressed, again and again, until whatever unity once held this village together began to collapse from within. He picked up Danzo's bounty poster, holding it where everyone could see it. And now the entire shinobi world knows that one of your closest advisors harvested Sharingan from Uchiha corpses and grafted Hashirama Senju's cells onto his own body. He looked directly into Hiruzen's eyes. Whether you knew about these crimes, or whether you truly didn't, both possibilities are equally damning. His voice dropped, cold and precise. If you knew, you protected him. If you didn't, you failed in your duty as Hokage to ever notice. Silence. Absolute and total. Fugaku set the poster back down with care. I cannot prove whether you were directly involved, or merely complicit through neglect. But one fact remains beyond dispute. He let the pause stretch. You failed to stop any of it. Hiruzen's head lowered. For the first time since the meeting began, a genuine doubt took root in his chest. Have I, he thought, the question landing harder than he expected, really been such a terrible Hokage? Fugaku wasn't finished. And recently, you raised the village's tolls. The economy has suffered for it. Trade has slowed. Merchant families across Konoha have pulled back their investments, and several clans now struggle financially because of policies you personally authorized. He looked around the chamber one final time. For all of these reasons, we believe you are no longer fit to lead Konohagakure. The room held its silence for several long seconds. Then the Nara clan head rose from his seat. The Nara clan agrees. The Akamichi clan head stood next. The Akamichi clan agrees. The Yamanaka clan agrees. The Aburame clan agrees. The Inazuka clan agrees. One after another, every clan leader in the room voiced the same verdict, the words echoing off the chamber walls until there was nothing left to say. Hiruzen looked slowly around the table. Not a single face offered him support. His expression curdled into something bitter, something tired. For decades he had believed, without question, that he was protecting this village. Today, every clan in the room stood against him. Fugaku quietly placed one final document on the table, an official decree from the Fire Daimyo. Hiruzen picked it up with a hand that was not quite steady. The Fire Daimyo had formally approved the council's request for a new Hokage election. Hiruzen Sarutobi, Fugaku said. Even Fire Daimyo-sama has concluded that your continued leadership no longer serves the best interests of the Land of Fire. Nara Shikaku folded his hands atop the table. The village cannot continue under the current administration. Konoha requires new leadership. The Akamichi clan head let out a long breath. We can no longer ignore reality. One by one, every clan leader in the chamber voiced their agreement, until finally the senior council secretary rose to his feet. In accordance with the will of the Fire Daimyo, and by unanimous agreement of the assembled clan leaders, Hiruzen Sarutobi is hereby removed from the position of Hokage. The chamber fell into complete silence. Slowly, Hiruzen reached up and removed the Hokage hat from his head. For several long moments he simply stared at it, turning it over once in his hands as though trying to remember what it had felt like the day he'd first put it on. Then, without a single word, he set it gently on the table before him. His tenure as the third Hokage had come, quietly and without ceremony, to its end. The secretary waited for the silence to settle fully before speaking again. Now we shall proceed to the next matter of business. He looked out over the assembled clans. The selection of Konoha's next Hokage. If anyone wishes to nominate a candidate, step forward now. The moment the words left his mouth, Hiruzen rose from his seat once more. I nominate Jiraiya. Every eye in the chamber turned toward the former Hokage. Jiraiya fought in the Third Shinobi War and distinguished himself time and time again, Hiruzen said, his voice steadier now that he had a purpose to fill it with. He is one of the legendary Sannin. He carries strength few in this world can match, and respect across all 5 great nations. He paused. And more than any of that, he loves this village. I believe no one is better suited to become the 5th Hokage. Quiet nods moved through the room. Jiraiya's reputation, whatever else was said today, remained beyond question. Just as it seemed the nomination might pass unopposed, a chair scraped back. Shikaku Nara rose to his feet. I nominate Uchiha Fugaku. The entire chamber went still. Whispers broke out almost instantly among the smaller clans. What? The Nara are backing the Uchiha. Isn't this their own best shot at the seat? Even Hiruzen's eyes widened, the question forming before he could stop it. What is Shikaku planning? The previous night, Nara Estate. Inside the Nara compound, the leaders of the Nara, Akamichi, and Yamanaka clans had gathered for a private meeting that stretched long into the night. Eventually, one of the elders broke the long silence. I believe Shikaku should stand as our candidate for Hokage. Several heads nodded around the room. Among the younger generation of the 3 allied clans, no one carried more raw capability than Shikaku, and everyone present knew it. But Shikaku shook his head. No. Every eye turned toward him. If we enter this race, he said, it becomes a 3-way struggle. He drew 3 circles onto a map spread across the table. Roughly 40% of the votes go to Jiraiya. He's one of the legendary Sannin. His reputation alone guarantees him enormous support, regardless of anything else. He tapped a second circle, tracing its edge slowly with one finger. Nearly 50% go to the Uchiha. He let that number sit for a moment before continuing. Over these past months, they've invested heavily in rebuilding parts of this village, not just their own district, but roads, water systems, storefronts that had been sitting empty for years. They've propped up struggling clans financially, sometimes without ever asking for anything back. The smaller families have felt that generosity directly, in ways they won't easily forget. He glanced up. They're all but guaranteed to fall in behind Fugaku. One of the Akamichi elders shifted in his seat, arms crossed. So we're conceding before the vote's even called. I'm not conceding anything, Shikaku said mildly. I'm reading the board as it actually stands, not as we'd like it to. He moved his finger to the smallest of the 3 circles and let it rest there. That leaves us. Perhaps 10%, if we're being generous with ourselves. He let the number sit in the silence a moment longer than was comfortable. We simply don't have the influence to win this outright. Not this time. No one argued. The math spoke for itself, and every elder in the room had spent enough decades reading numbers like this one to know when the numbers weren't going to move in their favor no matter how the conversation went. The room went quiet, the truth of it settling in slowly, the way bad news always did among people too experienced to flinch outwardly at it. Finally, one of the Yamanaka elders broke the silence. Then what would you have us do, Shikaku? Sit this one out entirely? No. Shikaku shook his head. Sitting it out is its own kind of vote. It just means we forfeit any say in what comes after. He straightened, and something in his tone sharpened, the lazy cadence falling away for the first time that night. So instead of fighting a battle we can't win, we choose to throw our support behind one of the 2 major factions before anyone else does. Timing is the only leverage we have left. We might as well use it. He looked around at the gathered elders, letting his gaze move from face to face before he laid out the choice in front of them plainly. If we back Jiraiya, this race turns into something close to a coin flip. Even if he wins, we become just one more name on a long list of supporters, easily overlooked once the seat is filled. And if the Uchiha win instead, which, by these numbers, is the far more likely outcome, they'll have every reason to push us aside afterward. We'll have backed the losing side in a fight we didn't need to enter at all. He paused there, letting the weight of that outcome settle fully before offering the alternative, wanting them to arrive at it almost on their own. But if we back the Uchiha first, before the vote is anywhere close to decided, they'll owe us something real. Not a debt they can quietly forget in a year, but the kind they'll remember, that when the outcome still felt uncertain, the Nara clan chose to stand with them anyway. A faint smile crossed his face, there and gone. And ask yourselves honestly, have any of you walked through their compound lately? Seen what they've built there with their own hands? A few of the elders exchanged glances, murmuring low agreement. Even those who resented the Uchiha's rising influence couldn't deny what they'd seen with their own eyes. Their reforms turned a declining district into one of the most prosperous corners of this entire village, Shikaku continued. If they bring that same vision to Konoha as a whole, instead of just their own streets, this village's economy could flourish in ways it hasn't in decades. That's not a small thing to attach ourselves to early. Murmurs of consideration moved through the room. The longer everyone sat with the idea, the more sense it made. Finally, one of the elder Nara rose. Shikaku. He nodded slowly. You truly did inherit your father's wisdom. I believe this is the wisest path forward. One by one, the Akamichi and Yamanaka representatives fell in agreement. We agree. The Nara Alliance will support Uchiha Fugaku. Back inside the council chamber, Shikaku finished delivering his nomination. The Nara clan supports Uchiha Fugaku. Almost before he'd sat back down, the Akamichi clan head rose. The Akamichi clan agrees. Then the Yamanaka clan head stood as well. The Yamanaka clan supports Uchiha Fugaku. Whispers rippled through the chamber like wind through dry grass. Even Fugaku looked genuinely caught off guard. Before he could clarify that the Uchiha clan had not yet formally chosen a candidate of its own, one of the Uchiha elders stepped forward without waiting to be asked. I speak on behalf of the Uchiha clan. We officially nominate Uchiha Fugaku. Fugaku turned toward him sharply, surprise plain on his face. The elder didn't so much as glance in his direction. Instead, leaning close, he murmured just low enough for Fugaku alone to hear. Don't ruin this. Our clan needs one of its own in that seat. Then he straightened and addressed the full council. We all know Lord Fugaku's record. During the Third Shinobi War, his strategies carried Konoha to victory time and again. He commands the military police force with a steady hand, and he carries years of administrative experience few others in this room can claim. He turned, with visible respect, toward Jiraiya. I hold Lord Jiraiya in the highest regard. No one doubts his strength. But leading an army and leading an entire village are two very different responsibilities. Lord Jiraiya has never governed an organization of any kind. Lord Fugaku already manages one of Konoha's largest institutions, and has for years. Several clan leaders considered the words in silence, a few nodding slowly. It was difficult to argue against plain experience. Shikaku stepped forward again, calm and measured. We now have two official candidates, Jiraiya and Uchiha Fugaku. He looked around the chamber. Does anyone else wish to nominate a third? Silence answered him. Very well. Since no further nominations have been made, we'll proceed directly to the vote. He glanced around at the assembled clans. As everyone here already knows, the previous administration is now the target of the largest bounty in shinobi history. This village cannot afford to sit without a Hokage. Rogue ninja, bounty hunters, and foreign assassins are almost certainly already moving toward Konoha's borders. We need stable leadership in place immediately. The Jonin filling the edges of the chamber nodded in agreement, every voting representative present and accounted for. Shikaku raised his voice. Those in support of Lord Jiraiya, raise your hands. Hands rose slowly around the chamber. The Sarutobi clan. A scattering of Shimura Jonin. A handful of smaller clans still tied closely to Hiruzen's administration. A few independent Jonin scattered among them. Hiruzen watched the count with a sinking heart. What is happening? He thought, unable to keep the disbelief from settling in. When I sat in that seat, nearly every clan in this village swore me their loyalty. Where is all of it now? Then Hiyashi Hyuga slowly raised his hand. The Hyuga clan would support Jiraiya. Behind his composed expression, Hiyashi had already run the calculation through to its end. The Uchiha already command overwhelming support. Adding ours to that pile gains us nothing. But if we're among the few who stand with Jiraiya now, he'll remember exactly who we were when it counted. A few other undecided clan leaders arrived at the same conclusion in the silence that followed, and a handful more hands rose slowly into the air. Once the count was finished, Shikaku announced the result. Approximately 35% support Lord Jiraiya. Hiruzen let out a quiet breath. Even worse than he'd braced himself for. Shikaku raised his voice again. Those in support of Lord Fugaku, raise your hands. Hands shot upward across the chamber almost as one motion. Clan after clan fell in behind Fugaku, the count climbing without pause until it was clear the outcome wasn't close at all. Hiruzen stared blankly ahead. Has the Uchiha really won this outright? Beside him, Jiraiya only smiled, faint and bitter, already having made peace with what the room had decided. Across the table, Fugaku himself sat frozen for a long moment, visibly overwhelmed. He had never imagined this many clans would fall in behind him, not this quickly, not this completely. Once the final tally was confirmed, Shikaku rose and let his voice carry through the chamber. The result is clear. By overwhelming majority, Uchiha Fugaku has been elected the 5th Hokage of Konohagakure. He bowed slightly. Congratulations, Lord 5th. For one brief moment, the chamber held its silence. Then applause broke out, clan leaders rising from their seats one after another. Congratulations, Lord 5th. The Hyuga clan congratulates you. The Nara clan congratulates you. The Akamichi clan congratulates you. The Yamanaka clan congratulates you. Even several smaller clan heads stepped forward to offer their own respects. Behind Fugaku, the Uchiha elders could barely hold themselves together. Fists clenched, not in anger this time, but in something closer to disbelief and relief. Some smiled openly, unguarded. More than one had tears standing in their eyes. After generations spent on the outside of this village's highest office, the Uchiha had finally reached it. Then, from outside the chamber, an Uchiha Jonin burst through the doors of the Hokage building, practically vibrating with excitement. He climbed the terrace of Hokage building and shouted with everything his lungs could give him. Lord Fugaku has been elected. Our clan head is the 5th Hokage. Outside, hundreds of Uchiha shinobi erupted into deafening cheers. Long live Lord 5th. Long live the Uchiha. Villagers who had benefited from the clan's recent reforms surged forward to join the celebration, their voices adding to the roar until it spread across the entire Hokage Plaza and beyond, carried through the streets of Konoha like wildfire. For the first time in the village's history, an Uchiha sat in the Hokage's chair. And all across Konoha, that night, celebration filled the air. On the far side of the forest, Uchiha Akira moved like a shadow slipping between the towering trees. His black cloak, embroidered with the crimson clouds of Akatsuki, snapped sharply behind him with every effortless leap, as though the wind itself had learned to fear him. Beside him ran Obito, Kakuzu, and Sasori, three of the most feared shinobi in the underworld, and yet none of them outpaced him. Despite their relentless speed, their footsteps barely disturbed the forest floor. No one spoke. Words were unnecessary between men who had already decided how the night would end. The oppressive silence that wrapped around them carried an unspoken promise of bloodshed, thick enough to taste. Their destination was Orochimaru's abandoned underground laboratory, a forgotten relic buried beneath the wilderness, left to rot by a man who rarely left anything to chance. Before long, the entrance emerged from the darkness, a narrow black scar carved into the hillside, almost swallowed whole by tangled roots and creeping vines, as if the forest itself were trying to hide what slept beneath it. Akira slowed to a halt. His crimson eyes lingered on the cave mouth, unreadable. Obito stopped beside him, folding his arms across his chest. The spiral of his orange mask caught the faint moonlight filtering down through the branches overhead, giving him the look of something carved rather than born. My scout says he's inside, Obito said quietly. Several days earlier, during his very first meeting with Danzo, Obito had secretly planted a white zetsu nearby. Disguised as nothing more than an ordinary shadow, it had remained perfectly still, watching everything around Danzo without ever drawing the faintest suspicion. For days, it had waited with the patience of something that did not need to breathe. Now, at last, that patience had paid off. A faint smile touched the corner of Akira's mouth, the smile of a man watching the first piece of a long plan click into place. He turned toward the 3 Akatsuki members beside him. Beneath his hood, his 2 Tomo Sharingan glowed with a cold, deliberate light. You can kill him, Akira said, his voice calm, almost conversational. I'll pay you for it. A pause. I only need his head. For several seconds, no one answered. Obito, Kakuzu, and Sasori exchanged brief glances, not because they doubted his words, but because none of them had quite adjusted to the sheer absurdity of the situation they now found themselves in. Only 2 hours earlier, the young man now calmly issuing orders had been nothing more than a prisoner. A captive Obito had dragged back from a side mission like an afterthought. None of them could have imagined that, before the night was through, that same prisoner would become Akatsuki's client, and its newest member. 2 hours earlier, the atmosphere inside Akatsuki's hidden command chamber was suffocating, thick with a tension that pressed against the skin like a held breath. Akira stood alone at its center. He had not been brought here as a guest. Every pair of eyes in the room rested on him with varying degrees of curiosity, suspicion, or outright killing intent, and he could feel each one of them, a dozen blades resting lightly against his throat. At the highest seat sat Pain. His ripple-patterned Rinnegan remained utterly emotionless, looking down on Akira as though weighing whether he deserved to live another minute, and finding the question mildly tedious. Conan stood quietly beside him, her paper wings folded neatly at her back like silent blades waiting for a reason to unfold. Near one wall stood Orochimaru. The pale Sannin watched with unmistakable amusement, his tongue flicking across his lips now and then, as if he were savoring the tension in the room the way other men savored wine. Kakuzu and Sasori had positioned themselves on either side of Akira, close enough that their killing intent pressed against his body like invisible chains. A single wrong word, and he had no doubt either one would end him without waiting for permission. Behind them stood Obito. His masked face revealed nothing. He simply watched. And waited. Finally, Kakuzu broke the silence, his rough voice grinding through the chamber like stone dragged across stone. A prisoner who still hasn't explained why he's worth keeping alive. He stared directly into Akira's eyes. Give me one good reason not to kill you right now, and take whatever you're carrying. Akira didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. And oddly enough, that complete absence of fear unsettled the room far more than panic ever could have. Most people standing where he stood would have been trembling, begging, scrambling for any thread that might let them survive another minute. Yet this young Uchiha stood before the most feared criminal organization in the world as though he'd known exactly how this meeting would go long before he ever walked into it. He let the silence stretch a moment longer, savoring it in his own quiet way. Then he spoke, his gaze shifting first to Orochimaru. I can be useful to you. A beat. Your research. The experiments no one else is willing to fund, I can fund them. I'll provide every resource you need. No one else can offer you that. For the briefest instant, something flickered behind Orochimaru's snake-like eyes. Not trust. Not acceptance. Interest. And for a man like Orochimaru, interest alone was no small thing. Akira turned his attention to the rest of the room. Soon, an Uchiha will sit in the Hokage's chair. He let the words settle before continuing. When that happens, you'll have someone inside Konoha. Someone who can walk through its gates openly. Someone whose name opens doors instead of closing them. His voice cooled a degree further. And there's something else. His gaze slid toward Obito. Since your masked friend is the one who captured me, my clan is already searching for you. They won't stop. Not until every one of you is dead. That's simply how the Uchiha operate. He paused, and for just a moment something almost gentle crossed his expression. I'd rather we weren't enemies. Silence settled over the chamber again, heavier this time. Conan leaned toward Pain and murmured something too quiet for anyone else to catch. Pain didn't move, didn't so much as blink, but something shifted behind those ripple-patterned eyes. Not emotion. Calculation. At last, he spoke. What use? He said slowly. Are you to Akatsuki? Akira met his gaze without hesitation. Money. He let the word hang before continuing. I'll pay 10 times your normal rate. More than any client has ever paid Akatsuki for a single mission. 10 times. For the first time, Conan's usually flawless composure cracked, just barely. Kakuzu's eyes went wide. Of everyone in the room, he understood best exactly what that number meant. Even Sasori's expression, normally carved from stone, shifted almost imperceptibly. Akira allowed himself a faint smile. You've probably already guessed part of the reason. He drew the moment out, unhurried. Right now, there's a bounty on Konoha's ruling council. 170 billion ryo. Every mercenary in the shinobi world is rushing toward the hidden leaf hoping to claim a piece of it. A pause, deliberate. That bounty belongs to me. The chamber fell silent, but it was a different silence now. Not hostility. Opportunity. Kakuzu recovered first. Money had always been the only language he trusted completely, and this was a number worth listening to. 10 times the rate, he repeated, almost to himself. Akira nodded once. Pain studied him for a long moment, the room holding its breath around him. Every member present waited on his verdict as though the air itself depended on it. Finally, Pain spoke. We can accept your offer. Akira raised an eyebrow, something wary creeping into the edges of his composure for the first time. On one condition, Pain continued. And that is. Pain's gaze shifted to the black cloak draped along one wall of the chamber. You'll wear the cloak. His voice remained level, final. If you want Akatsuki to work with you, you need to join us. For the first time since stepping into that chamber, Akira looked genuinely caught off guard. It wasn't the answer he'd prepared for. No one else in the ninja world understood Akatsuki's true worth. Every village, every client, every desperate lord who hired them still measured them the way you'd measure any ordinary band of mercenaries. A price per head, a fee per mission, nothing more. Fools. They had no idea what they were haggling over. Akira alone seemed to grasp what Akatsuki truly was. Not a group of killers for hire, but the single strongest force outside the walls of any hidden village, sitting there unclaimed, waiting for someone patient enough to pick it up. Once an Uchiha sat in the Hokage's seat, that force wouldn't need to be hidden in shadows anymore. It could be sent to the front lines, openly, wearing down every rival village long before they ever thought to move against Konoha. Let the other nations bleed themselves against Akatsuki while the leaf watched from a safe distance. Any problem that could be solved with money was no problem at all, as far as he was concerned, and this arrangement solved more than one. It would buy Konoha time. It would hold Akatsuki's hand back from the village's throat, at least for now, at least long enough for everything else to fall into place. Of course, not every piece on the board could be bought. There were only 2 members here who were a problem, and no amount of gold would change that. Obito and Pain. They would never stop chasing the tailed beasts, never stop reaching for their infinite Tsukuyomi, no matter what promises were made tonight. Men like that didn't retire. Sooner or later, they would have to die by his hand. He understood that even as he stood here smiling at them. But everyone else in this room, everyone else wearing that cloak, could be turned into something else entirely. Not enemies. Not even tools, really. Foundations. The raw material to make the Uchiha clan stronger than it had ever been in its long, bloody history. He could send them to hunt down rare and dying bloodlines across the continent, and in time, weave those bloodlines into his own clan through marriage. Give it 10 years, and there wouldn't be a village left standing that could threaten the Uchiha name. All of this passed through his mind in the space of a single breath. Then he nodded. Fine, he said. I accept. That agreement, forged in a tense chamber 2 hours before, was the only reason Akira now stood at the mouth of Orochimaru's old hideout, surrounded by killers instead of buried among his own dead. Their goals could hardly have been further apart, but reality cared nothing for that. Akatsuki still needed money to survive, to gather resources, to fund whatever ambitions burned behind Pain's Rinnegan eyes, and there was no mercenary force in the world stronger than they were. Akira needed exactly that kind of force, and he had the coin to command it. They were using each other in equal measure, each certain they held the greater advantage. Faced with an offer that outrageous, they had agreed without hesitation. Without another word, the Akatsuki members turned and entered Orochimaru's underground laboratory, vanishing one by one into the dark. Akira remained standing outside the cave. He knew his own limits well enough not to test them here. Compared to monsters like Danzo and the people he now called allies, he would be nothing but collateral damage if he followed them inside. A body in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught between forces he couldn't hope to match. And there was still the matter of the unknown. No one, not even Akatsuki, knew for certain what secret techniques Danzo might still be hiding behind that bandaged arm. There was no reason to gamble his life to find out. At that same hour, inside the walls of Konohagakure, the night carried a different kind of violence, one far quieter and far more final. Kaharu Yuditane and Homura Mitokado were walking home after meeting Hiruzen, the streets around them empty at that hour, lit only by the pale glow of lanterns strung along the rooftops. Decades of service to the village sat behind them like a long shadow. They had outlived wars, outlived the men who once called them rivals, and had come, in their old age, to believe themselves untouchable. They never saw what came for them. There was no cry, no clash of steel, no chakra flare bright enough to wake a single sleeping household nearby. One moment the 2 elders were walking in the hush of the night. The next, they were simply gone from it. Their bodies left behind without a mark to explain how death had found them so completely unheard. Whoever had done it did not linger to admire the work. Within the hour, they had already slipped through the village's underground passages toward the hidden bounty exchange that thrived beneath Konoha's notice, a market built for men who traded in lives and asked no questions about whose. There, waiting with the same unhurried calm they'd shown in the act itself, stood representatives of Sunagakure. They confirmed the kill with a few quiet words, accepted payment in full, and slipped back out into the night as though they had never been there at all. No one in Konoha would know the sand had even been within its walls. By evening, Hiruzen Sarutobi sat alone inside his home. The room was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed in on a man and made him aware of his own heartbeat. Whoosh. Jiraiya appeared through the window, landing without a sound despite his size. The normally carefree Sanin wore an expression Hiruzen had seen on him perhaps a handful of times in his life, grim, and utterly without humor. His jaw was tight, his knuckles pale where his hand still gripped the windowsill, as though he needed something solid to hold onto before he said the words out loud. Old man. Jiraiya's voice was low, almost reluctant, like a man forcing a blade through his own hand. Kaharu and Homura are dead. The Sand Village has already claimed the bounty on their heads. For a moment, Hiruzen didn't move at all. Then his eyes went wide, truly wide, the composure of decades cracking open all at once. His pipe slipped from his fingers and struck the floor with a soft, hollow clatter that neither man bothered to acknowledge. His mouth opened as if to speak, but nothing came. Kaharu. Homura. The two people who had stood beside him since they were children training under the same masters, who had advised him through every war, every crisis, every long and grinding year of his rule. Gone. Erased in a single afternoon, their heads sold across the desert like cattle at market. No. The word came out barely above a whisper, disbelief clinging to it like frost. That's not. Jiraiya, tell me that's not true. But Jiraiya only held his gaze, and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Hiruzen lowered his head slowly. A deep sigh escaped him, and for a moment his old eyes filled with something heavier than grief. The particular, hollowing weight of a man watching the foundation of his own life give way beneath him. If he had known it would come to this, if he had understood even a fraction of what would unravel, he would never have given the order to have Uchiha Akira captured. That single decision, made in what felt now like another lifetime, had set every one of these stones falling, and there was no way left to catch them. Before he could gather himself, another presence entered the room. An Ando operative dropped from the shadows and knelt before him, head bowed low enough that his mask nearly touched the floor. Lord Hokage. The Akatsuki have claimed Danzo Shimura's head. What? Hiruzen's eyes widened, disbelief cutting through the sorrow. Even Danzo. The one man Hiruzen had always assumed too careful, too paranoid, too well protected by his own secrets to ever fall this way. A cold, unfamiliar fear crept into his chest. If Danzo could be killed like this, hunted down and erased in a single night, then who was safe? Who was next? Am I next? He thought. Will they come for me as well? For the first time in more years than he could count, the third Hokage felt something close to real fear. He had always pictured his own death on some distant battlefield, protecting the village with his hands and his will, the way a Hokage was meant to die. Never like this. Never sitting alone in his own home, waiting for the dark to decide his fate for him. Knock. The sound at the front door was almost gentle by comparison. Moments later, Shisui Uchiha stepped inside and bowed with the same quiet respect he always carried. Lord Third Hokage. His tone was even, careful. The fifth Hokage has issued a warrant for your arrest. We're placing you under protective custody. There is reason to believe someone intends to assassinate you. Hiruzen's expression darkened at once, the fear inside him curdling into something sharper. Shisui. His voice cracked like a whip. Don't take me for a fool. This is the Uchiha clan's doing. You're the ones behind these bounties. Shisui didn't so much as flinch. He met the accusation with the same unshaken calm he met everything. I know nothing about that, Hokage-sama. He let the words settle before continuing. Perhaps Danzo acted in the Uchiha clan's name without our knowledge. He committed a great many crimes. We are still investigating the full extent of them. Hiruzen's face darkened further still. They're laying every crime at Danzo's feet, he thought bitterly, as if none of the rest of them had any part in it at all. Before he could answer, several Uchiha Jonin stepped into the room. Without hesitation, they placed a series of sealing jutsu across his body, suppressing his chakra layer by layer until it lay dormant beneath his skin. Once the last seal locked into place, they escorted the former Hokage from his own home and out into the night. Meanwhile, inside the Hokage's office, Uchiha Fugaku sat behind the great desk, all but buried beneath towering stacks of paperwork that seemed to multiply the moment he cleared one pile. Beside him, Narushikaku worked through the endless stream of documents with the same tireless patience he brought to everything, though even he was beginning to show the strain. Fugaku rubbed at his aching temple and shot his advisor a helpless look. Shikaku. How much more of this is there? Shikaku managed only a weary half-smile. I couldn't tell you, Hokage-sama. The hours dragged on. Night slowly gave way to the gray light of morning, and still the lamps in the Hokage's office burned on without pause. Fugaku remained buried beneath his mountain of documents, and Shikaku, for all his composure, now looked just as drained. Both men bore the same dark circles beneath their eyes, the unmistakable mark of a night spent entirely without rest. Then, without warning, an Ando appeared in the office and dropped to one knee. Lord Hokage. Tsunade-sama has arrived. What? Both Fugaku and Shikaku nearly came out of their seats. Tsunade's sudden, unannounced arrival caught them entirely off guard. Given her standing throughout the village, a popularity that rivaled, and in some corners exceeded, Fugaku's own, there was a very real possibility that if she chose to challenge him and call for a new election, Fugaku could lose the Hokage's seat before he'd even had the chance to grow into it. On the other side of the gates, Konohagakure looked the same as it always had. The same red roofs, the same green hills rolling toward the horizon, and yet something in the air felt subtly wrong to Tsunade, like a familiar song played half a step out of tune. She had barely crossed the threshold when an Ando operative dropped from the rooftops, landing in a crouch before her and bowing his head. Tsunade-sama. Tsunade looked him over, arms crossed, golden eyes narrowing with impatience. Where's the old man? I want to see him. The operative hesitated, just long enough for her to notice. Tsunade-sama, he said again, this time with a weight that made her stomach tighten. The village has elected a new Hokage. Her eyebrow lifted, just slightly. And who is it? Uchiha Fugaku. For a moment, Tsunade said nothing. The name hung in the air between them, and something in her chest tightened. Not quite shock, but the dull ache of a piece falling into place she hadn't expected. Fugaku. Of course. She turned the thought over slowly, the way she might study a difficult diagnosis. With Hiruzen gone from the seat of power and Jiraiya still wandering the world chasing his own ghosts, there was no one left of the old guard with the weight to hold the village together. Her jaw tightened. I want to see the old man. Yes, Tsunade-sama. The operative rose without another word and led her deeper into the village. She noticed immediately that they weren't heading toward the Hokage Tower. Her stomach dropped as the streets grew narrower, the buildings older, until at last they stood before the heavy, reinforced doors of the Uchiha detention facility. Tsunade's steps slowed. The prison was buried beneath layer upon layer of ceiling barriers, glowing faintly along the corridor walls, humming with suppressive chakra so dense it made the air feel thick. She had seen battlefields that felt less oppressive than this hallway. At last, they came to a reinforced cell at the very end of the corridor. When Tsunade stepped inside, her breath caught. The man behind the bars was barely recognizable as the third Hokage she remembered, the man whose calm authority had once steadied an entire village. His robes hung wrinkled and gray, stripped of the dignity they once carried. His hair, once neatly kept, fell in disheveled strands around a face hollowed by exhaustion. Deep shadows ringed his eyes, and layered across his skin were dozens of sealing formulas, glowing faint blue, smothering his chakra so completely that he felt almost like an ordinary old man. Old man. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. At the sound of it, something flickered back to life in Hiruzen's dull eyes. He surged toward the bars as far as the seals would allow, fingers curling around the cold metal. Tsunade. His voice cracked with desperate relief. Little Tsunade. Get me out of here. He pressed himself closer, urgency spilling out of him in a rush. These evil Uchiha. They mean to execute me publicly. You have to speak to the fire daimyo. Tsunade, I know he'll listen to you. He'll call another election, he has to. His words tumbled over one another, equal parts plea and command, as though sheer momentum might make her agree faster. To him, she realized with a pang, she was the last thread he had left to hold onto. Tsunade let out a long, weary sigh, the kind that seemed to carry the weight of everything she'd seen on her travels. Old man. Her tone was quiet now, almost gentle. Just let it go. Confusion flickered across his face. You're already so old, she said. Let it end here. The calm finality in her voice stopped him cold. His mouth opened, then closed again. And don't think, Tsunade continued, her voice hardening with every word, that I don't know what you did to the Senju clan. Hiruzen went rigid. You let our bloodline bleed out slowly. Battle after battle, you sent them out until there was almost no one left to carry the name. Her golden eyes, usually so full of warmth, had turned to ice. And now you couldn't even let my grandfather rest in peace. The dead deserve dignity, old man. But you turned his legacy into nothing more than a tool for your politics. Color drained from Hiruzen's face. Tsunade. Everything I did. His voice wavered. I did it for the village. She studied him in silence for a long moment, the years of distance between them suddenly feeling like nothing at all, and everything at once. Then she shook her head slowly. But you shouldn't have killed your own villagers to do it. You always spoke about the will of fire, she went on, each word landing like a stone. Yet the moment someone threatened your authority, your plans, you sacrificed them and called it the greater good. She took a step closer to the bars, close enough now that she could see the tremor in his hands. How many innocent people died because you chose the village over justice? How many children were turned into weapons because you told yourself the ends justified the means? The village was supposed to protect its people, old man, not use them up. Hiruzen's fists clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening. I made difficult decisions. His voice was hoarse now, pleading with itself as much as with her. No Hokage keeps his hands completely clean. Everything I did was to preserve peace. Tsunade's expression didn't soften. Peace built on fear isn't peace. She let the words settle before continuing. A village built on lies collapses eventually, under its own weight. You taught us to protect our comrades. But somewhere along the way, she paused, and for the first time, something like sorrow crossed her face. You stopped seeing people as comrades. They became sacrifices. The cell fell into silence. Hiruzen lowered his head, shoulders sinking beneath a weight far heavier than the seals binding his chakra. For the first time in decades, he found he had no answer to give. Tsunade held his gaze a moment longer, searching for something, an argument, an excuse, anything that might make this easier. But there was nothing left in his eyes but exhaustion and defeat. She turned toward the door. I won't interfere with the village's decision, she said quietly, not looking back. The era of the third Hokage is over. And with that, she walked out of the prison, leaving Hiruzen Sarutobi alone behind the iron bars, swallowed by the silence of the cell he had built his own legacy into. Soon after leaving the prison, Tsunade made her way toward the Hokage tower, her footsteps slow and deliberate, as though some part of her wasn't ready to arrive. The building rose ahead of her, unchanged by the years, and with it came a flood of memories she hadn't braced herself for. Some were warm, quiet nights spent arguing with Hiruzen over paperwork he refused to finish, the pride in his eyes the day she'd become a jonin. Most, though, were not. Too many of her memories of this place were stitched together with loss. She climbed the familiar stairs, her hand trailing briefly along the worn railing, and stopped before the Hokage's office. For a moment, she simply stood there, staring at the door as if it might tell her what to expect. Then she knocked. Come in. Pushing the door open, she stepped inside, and the first thing that caught her eye was the mountain of paperwork threatening to swallow the desk whole. Scrolls, reports, and requisition forms rose in uneven towers, and behind them, buried up to his elbows in it all, sat Uchiha Fugaku. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes, deep enough to tell her he'd barely slept in days. Beside him stood Shikaku Nara, calmly sorting documents into neat, orderly piles, entirely unbothered by the chaos surrounding him. Fugaku looked up as she entered, and something like relief flickered briefly across his tired face. Tsunade. She folded her arms, studying him with open curiosity. I thought you were going to rebel. A faint, almost tired smile touched his lips. I was. His answer came without hesitation, without shame, just quiet honesty. But I was also looking for a way for everyone to survive. Tsunade nodded slowly, understanding settling over her before he even finished the thought. War, she knew better than most, was never as simple as choosing between victory and defeat. Sometimes the greatest victory was the one where fewer people had to bleed for it, where the fighting simply stopped. Fugaku reached toward a stack of older, yellowed documents at the edge of his desk. He searched through them for a moment before pulling one free, a proposal worn soft at the edges from handling. I've been reviewing the village's old records, he said, setting it down on the desk in front of her. I like the proposal you submitted 5 years ago. Tsunade's eyes widened. She recognized it instantly. Her medical reform proposal, the one she'd poured months of frustration and hope into. Fugaku continued, tapping the page. Every ninja squad must have at least one medical ninja. Then, without a moment's hesitation, he picked up his brush. I approve it. With a single, decisive stroke, he signed the document right there in front of her. Tsunade stood frozen, staring at the fresh ink as though it might vanish if she blinked. 5 years. 5 years since she'd stood in this same office, presenting this same proposal to the third Hokage, and every single time, without fail, it had been turned away. Always the same excuse. There isn't enough budget. But money had never been the reason she pushed for it. She'd proposed it because she never wanted another young shinobi to bleed out on a battlefield the way Dan had. The way Naoki had. If every squad carried someone trained to save lives instead of only take them, maybe fewer families would have to learn to live with empty chairs at their tables. Fugaku's dark eyes lifted to meet hers. Tsunade. His voice softened. Don't leave the village. The village needs you. Her eyes stung, unexpectedly, and she blinked against the sudden warmth gathering there. She drew a slow breath, steadying herself. But, her voice came out quieter than she intended. I don't want to work anymore. It wasn't her body that was tired. It was something deeper, a weariness worn into her by years of watching people she loved slip through her fingers no matter how hard she fought to hold on. Fugaku was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully before he spoke again. Then let me give you a reason. He set down one document and reached for a fresh one. I am appointing you head medical officer of Konohagakure. I want you to train the next generation of medical ninja. He uncapped his brush again. Your monthly salary will be 500,000 ryo. What? Tsunade stared at him, certain she'd misheard. 500,000. She was, in truth, drowning in debt. Years of reckless gambling had hollowed out nearly everything she'd ever owned. Even so, the number he'd named was so far beyond anything she dared to imagine that for a moment she simply couldn't process it. Fugaku waited, patient, his brush still poised over the page. After a long moment, Tsunade crossed her arms and lifted her chin, testing him. I want 1 million ryo. She said it deliberately, doubling the figure just to see how he'd react. No sane Hokage would agree to that. She was certain of it. Agreed. Fugaku signed the document without so much as blinking. You can start today. What? Tsunade blinked rapidly, certain her ears had betrayed her. You agreed. Just like that. She could hardly believe it. Back when she'd first pitched her reforms, she'd have considered herself lucky to receive even 200,000 ryo a month. And now Fugaku had handed her 5 times that without so much as a counteroffer. For one wild, fleeting moment, she wondered if the new Hokage had lost his mind. Fugaku, meanwhile, had already moved on to the next stack of paperwork, his expression unreadable as calculations turned quietly behind his eyes. Your name alone is worth far more than 1 million ryo a month. As long as the world knows that Tsunade of the legendary Sannin has returned to Konoha, and chosen to stay, more than a few enemies will think twice before testing this village's strength. That kind of deterrent is worth more than any amount spent on soldiers or weapons. And beyond that, your presence alone will lift the spirits of every villager, every shinobi who's ever heard your name spoken with respect. Weighed against all of that, 1 million ryo is nothing. A bargain, really. He kept these thoughts carefully to himself, his brush moving steadily from one document to the next as though nothing unusual had happened at all. Tsunade stood before the desk in silence, the ink on her contract still glistening, the weight of the offer settling slowly over her. For the first time in many, many years, she found herself genuinely considering staying. Many days passed. Under Uchiha Fugaku's leadership, Konohagakure began to change at an astonishing pace. The endless political turmoil that had plagued the village for so long gradually faded into memory, replaced by something the villagers had almost forgotten how to feel: stability. Fugaku, once buried beneath mountains of paperwork he barely understood, had grown into the rhythm of it all. With Shikaku at his side, sharp and methodical as ever, the administration ran more efficiently than it had in years. One by one, outdated policies were quietly abolished. The heavy toll taxes once imposed on merchants entering the village were lifted entirely, and Fugaku ordered that the Uchiha clan's advanced construction techniques be shared openly with the other noble clans, rather than hoarded as a private advantage. He didn't want to strengthen only his own clan. He wanted the whole village to rise together. The results came quickly. Konoha entered an era of rapid growth unlike anything it had seen in a generation. Construction projects sprang up across the village. Roads widened. Markets swelled with new stalls and busier crowds. New buildings rose one after another, reshaping the skyline a little more each week. Merchants from every corner of the 5 great nations began making the journey to Konoha to do business, and trade flourished as never before. Every major clan saw their income climb by nearly 20%. For the first time in years, the villagers could genuinely feel it. Life was getting better. One peaceful morning, an Uchiha Jonin burst into the Hokage's office, dropping immediately to one knee. Lord Hokage. Fugaku looked up from the document in his hands, his brow creasing slightly at the urgency in the young man's voice. What is it? The Jonin bowed his head lower, his voice heavy. Lord Third Hokage has passed away. The words settled over the office like a weight. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The medical report says his health had been declining for several days, the Jonin continued quietly. He passed peacefully, in his sleep, last night. Fugaku closed his eyes. A slow breath escaped him. Not quite relief, not quite grief, but something tangled between the two. When he opened his eyes again, his expression had settled into quiet resolve. Announce a village holiday for today. The Jonin's head snapped up, surprise breaking through his composure. And, Fugaku added, build a monument in his honor. Let every villager know that a hero died today. The Jonin froze, unable to mask the confusion on his face. Hokage-sama, a hero. Fugaku nodded, calm and certain. Yes, although he made many mistakes, he continued, and although history will judge no small number of his decisions harshly, he still protected this village from countless threats for many long years. That alone deserves to be remembered. The Jonin said nothing, listening. No person is completely good, Fugaku said, his gaze drifting toward the window, out to where the carved faces of the Hokage monument watched over the village. And no person is completely evil. He was quiet for a moment before continuing. Besides, even in death, he can still become something that inspires the generations after him. A village united is always stronger than one divided by old grudges and unhealed wounds. So let the people remember him. Not because he was perfect, but because he gave his life to protecting Konoha. Something in the Jonin's expression shifted, the confusion giving way to quiet understanding. I understand, Hokage-sama. I'll make the arrangements immediately. He vanished in a body flicker, and the office fell still once more. Fugaku leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, and let his gaze fall to a folded letter resting at the corner of his desk. It had arrived several days earlier, unsigned, slipped in among the routine reports without explanation. He hadn't needed a signature to know who had sent it. Uchiha Akira. He unfolded it again, eyes tracing the final lines for what must have been the 10th time, and let out a helpless little chuckle despite himself. Shaking his head, he folded the letter closed. This Uchiha Akira. He rubbed his forehead, a tired smile tugging at his mouth. Is he really an Uchiha, or is he secretly a Nara? How was he even able to think this far ahead? Outside the Hokage Tower, the village carried on, alive with the ordinary rhythms of a good day. Children laughed as they chased each other through the streets. Merchants called out over the noise, hawking their wares to passing crowds. Shinobi moved through it all at an easy, unhurried pace, patrolling streets that, for once, needed little watching. The will of fire continued to burn, not in the hands of one man alone, but in the hearts of an entire village. The end.
If you enjoyed this original story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment if you want to see what happens next. There are many more stories waiting for you on my channel. Go check them out. Your support means everything, and it keeps me motivated to create more epic content like this. See you in the next one.